Part 1. The Confrontation. This ghetto trash doesn't belong in first class. Someone should teach her a lesson. Blood trickled down Olivia Reynolds' wrist as two uniformed officers dragged her through the crowded terminal of Newark International Airport. The metal handcuffs bit deeper with each step, cutting into her dark skin until crimson droplets spattered onto the polished floor, marking her path like twisted breadcrumbs. The pain registered in her eyes, but her face remained composed, her spine straight despite the public humiliation. All around them, passengers froze in their tracks. Business travelers lowered their phones mid-conversation. Families pulled children closer. Mothers whispering explanations that widened young eyes with confusion. Within seconds, dozens of smartphones rose in unison, recording the spectacle of a 17-year-old black girl in handcuffs, bleeding, yet somehow maintaining her dignity amid the chaos. "That's her," announced Madison Parker, a blonde woman in her mid-30s wearing a crisp Sky Global Airlines uniform. She stood behind the officers, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk playing across her lips. She was aggressive on board, threatening. We had no choice. Aggressive. That single word echoed through the terminal like a slap. It was the word that had been used for generations to justify cruelty against people who had done nothing wrong except exist while black. The same word that had sent innocent men to prison, that had stolen opportunities from qualified applicants, that had escalated routine traffic stops into tragedies. Olivia's voice stayed steady, cutting through the noise. "I have a valid ticket. I was seated quietly. I did nothing wrong." Each word was measured, controlled, even as the officers yanked her forward, making the handcuffs dig deeper. A middle-aged woman in a business suit whispered to her companion, "This is disgusting." "What did that poor girl do?" "Nothing," replied an elderly man who had witnessed everything. "She was just sitting there when they accused her of stealing a laptop." What none of those recording bystanders could possibly know was that this moment, this public humiliation captured on dozens of phones, would soon flip the entire aviation industry upside down. Because the teenager they were dragging through that terminal wasn't just anyone. She was the daughter of Marcus Reynolds, founder and CEO of Reynolds Aviation Holdings, one of the largest investment firms in America with controlling interests in 3 commercial airlines. The security officer on the left tightened his grip on Olivia's arm. "Keep moving," he growled, loud enough for the growing audience to hear his authority. Madison Parker stepped closer, her voice dripping with contempt. "This is what happens when you don't know your place." The words stung worse than the metal cutting into Olivia's wrists. She had heard that phrase before, in history books, in her mother's stories, in the cautionary tales her father had shared. Know your place had been used to keep people like her out of schools, neighborhoods, and boardrooms for generations. The terminal's bright lighting accentuated the growing bloodstains on Olivia's white blouse cuffs. The stark contrast, white fabric, red blood, dark skin created a visual that would soon become impossible for millions to forget. "My phone," Olivia said calmly. "I need to call my father." "Shut up," the second officer snapped. "You can make calls after processing." A teenage passenger, Emma Sullivan, held her phone higher, ensuring she captured everything. Her live stream had already reached 8,000 viewers. The comment section exploding, "OMG, they're making her bleed. Someone call the police on the police. What airline is this? Boycott now." Madison's voice rose, playing to the crowd. "We have zero tolerance for threatening behavior on our aircraft. Zero tolerance." As the officers pushed Olivia toward a security office, her gaze remained forward, her shoulders straight despite the pain. She had been taught her entire life that the world would not see her brilliance first. It would see her skin. But she had also been taught something else: dignity cannot be handcuffed. Have you ever witnessed someone's humanity being stripped away in public? Their innocence questioned solely because of their appearance, while strangers decide whether your humiliation is worthy of intervention or just another viral video. Have you ever felt the weight of centuries of prejudice crushing down in a single moment, leaving you bleeding and publicly shamed for a crime you didn't commit? Little did Madison Parker know that in less than 24 hours, she would be the one facing questions, and Sky Global Airlines would never be the same again. Flashback morning preparation 6 hours earlier. Morning sunlight had streamed through the windows of a modest but elegant townhouse in suburban Newark. Olivia Reynolds stood before her mirror, smoothing the collar of her neatly pressed white blouse. Her natural hair was pulled back in a professional style, and her dark eyes reflected a determination beyond her 17 years. On her bed lay an open backpack, meticulously organized with color-coded folders, printed research papers, and presentation slides stored in a protective case. The title page was visible: Advanced Propulsion Systems Efficiency Innovations for Commercial Aviation. This was no ordinary high school project. This was Olivia's ticket to MIT's prestigious aerospace engineering program. Her dream since she was 9 years old. "You've got this," came a deep, warm voice from her doorway. Marcus Reynolds leaned against the frame, watching his daughter with undisguised pride. At 47, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built something significant from nothing. His charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, but he wore no flashy jewelry, no designer labels screaming wealth. Few people outside the aviation industry would recognize Marcus Reynolds on sight, and that was exactly how he wanted it. As the founder and CEO of Reynolds Aviation Holdings, he had built an investment empire worth billions, with controlling interests in regional carriers and substantial stakes in major airlines. Yet he had deliberately kept his face off magazine covers and his name out of society pages. "I know, Dad," Olivia replied, though her fingers nervously adjusted her blouse again. "The interview's at 5 p.m. I've rehearsed my presentation 12 times. Marcus smiled. "That's not what I'm talking about. You've got this because you're brilliant and because you've earned every opportunity through your own merit." He stepped into the room and placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "Remember what I always tell you. Respect can't be demanded. It must be earned." Olivia recited the familiar words, drawing comfort from them. "But never let anyone take yours away." "Exactly." He squeezed her shoulders gently. Unlike other CEOs who flaunted their success through their children, Marcus had raised Olivia without the trappings of privilege. No private jets for routine travel, no chauffeurs, no elite private schools where her last name would open doors. He wanted her to understand that her worth came not from his power, but from her own effort and character. When Olivia had won the regional robotics championship last year, she'd done so with a team from her public high school, using parts they'd scrounged and saved for. When she'd earned perfect SAT scores, she'd done it through late nights studying after her volunteer shifts at the local science center. The MIT scholarship interview was the culmination of years of genuine work. "When the world looks at you," Marcus said softly, his expression growing more serious, "they may not see your brilliance first. They'll see your skin. So stay proud. Stay composed no matter what." Olivia nodded. At 17, she thought she understood what her father meant. She did, but not yet how deeply she would need to draw on that lesson today. "Your mom would be so proud," Marcus added, his voice catching slightly. Elaine Reynolds had died from cancer when Olivia was just 9, but her spirit lived on in their home. In the books she loved that still filled their shelves. In the vintage flight manuals she'd collected. In the passion for aviation she'd instilled in both her husband and daughter. "I know," Olivia whispered. She picked up her mother's pilot wings pin. Elaine had been one of the first black female commercial pilots for a major airline, and fastened it to her blazer. Not as a symbol of nepotism, but as a private talisman of strength. Marcus checked his watch. "I need to head to the office. The board meeting starts in an hour." He hesitated. "I could still have a company car take you to Boston?" Olivia shook her head firmly. "No special treatment? Remember, that was our deal. I take public transportation and commercial flights like everyone else." Marcus laughed. "Stubborn, just like your mother." His expression softened. "One small compromise. I did book you first class, not for status, but for practicality. You can review your presentation without distraction." "Fine," Olivia conceded with a smile, "but only because it makes practical sense." Neither of them could have imagined how that small compromise, that simple first-class ticket, would change everything in just a few hours. Early warning signs. The first crack in Olivia's perfect morning appeared at the check-in counter. While white passengers ahead of her were processed efficiently, barely glancing up from their phones, the gate agent, a thin-lipped woman with rectangular glasses, spent nearly 5 minutes examining Olivia's identification. "Is there a problem?" Olivia asked politely. Maintaining the pleasant smile her father had taught her was sometimes necessary armor. "Just verifying," the woman replied curtly, eyes flicking between Olivia's face and ID with obvious suspicion. Her fingers moved deliberately slowly across the keyboard. "My flight leaves in 90 minutes, Olivia added, still polite but with a hint of assertion. The agent's lips tightened further, but she finally, reluctantly, printed the boarding pass. She slid it across the counter with barely concealed disdain. "Thank you," Olivia said, refusing to lower her standards even when others had abandoned theirs. As she walked towards security, she noticed something unusual. A small red mark in the corner of her boarding pass, a symbol she'd never seen before on previous flights. It looked like a flag, a code of some kind. She studied it for a moment, then tucked the boarding pass into her pocket, dismissing it as some new security feature. She didn't know yet that the small red mark would follow her through every checkpoint that day. At the TSA screening area, the same pattern emerged. "Random screening," announced a TSA officer when Olivia reached the front of the line. Despite her pre-check status, the middle-aged white businessman behind her passed through without additional scrutiny. So did the elderly white couple after him. Olivia submitted to the extra screening with grace, though the additional pat-down felt unnecessarily thorough. In her mind, she could hear her father's voice. "Sometimes dignity is the only thing they can't take from you, unless you surrender it." She collected her belongings and proceeded to her gate, where the pattern continued. The gate agent's eyes lingered on her first-class boarding pass with obvious skepticism. The woman actually looked Olivia up into her, taking in her simple but professional attire as if searching for evidence she didn't belong. "Boarding pass?" the agent asked, though it was already in her hand. Olivia maintained her composure. "Yes, seat 3A. The agent scanned the document, frowning at the beep of confirmation. She reluctantly handed it back. "Boarding will begin in 20 minutes. "Thank you, Jean," Olivia replied, then found a seat in the waiting area. She noticed eyes following her. Some curious, some suspicious. She was used to it. As one of few black students in advanced placement classes, she'd grown accustomed to being studied like an anomaly. She opened her tablet and began reviewing her presentation, focusing on the technical details rather than the discomfort of being constantly observed. When first-class boarding was announced, Olivia gathered her belongings. She felt the stares intensify as she approached the priority lane. "First-class passengers only," the gate agent announced loudly as Olivia approached, though she had already scanned Olivia's boarding pass minutes earlier. "Yes, seat 3A, Olivia repeated calmly, presenting her boarding pass again. The agent examined it with exaggerated scrutiny before reluctantly allowing her to board. On the aircraft, the flight attendant, Madison Parker, watched Olivia's approach with narrowed eyes. Madison was impeccably groomed, her blonde hair in a perfect chignon, her makeup flawless, her Sky Global uniform pristine. She embodied a very specific image of professional aviation service. "You're in first class?" Madison asked, her tone making it clear she found this unlikely. "Yes, seat 3A, Olivia confirmed, showing her boarding pass for what felt like the 10th time that morning. Madison's lips tightened, but she stepped aside. "It's by the window." "I know. Thank you," Olivia replied, maintaining her dignity despite the clear implication that she might not understand basic seating arrangements. As Olivia stored her backpack and settled into her seat, she felt the eyes of other first-class passengers. Some glanced away when she noticed them, while others continued to stare, clearly wondering how she had gained access to their exclusive domain. Olivia fastened her seatbelt and turned her attention to the window, her mother's wings pin pressed against her heart. Just a few more hours and she'd be at MIT, showing the world what she could do. She could endure a few uncomfortable stares to get there. She had no way of knowing that the red flag on her boarding pass had set in motion a sequence of events that would escalate far beyond uncomfortable stares. Incident catalyst. The flight was half full when a white businessman in his late 30s hurried aboard, visibly stressed. Travis Whitfield clutched an expensive leather briefcase and a laptop identical to Olivia's, a popular MacBook Air model with a standard silver finish. Madison Parker greeted him warmly. "Good morning, sir. Seat 3B is right here, next to the window." "That's an aisle seat," he corrected irritably. "Oh, my mistake." Madison flashed a bright smile. "Right here, then." Travis stowed his briefcase and settled beside Olivia, not acknowledging her. He placed his laptop in the seat pocket and immediately began typing on his phone. Olivia returned to reviewing her presentation notes on her tablet, occasionally glancing at the boarding process. The contrast was striking. Madison warmly greeting white passengers, her smile bright and welcoming, while merely nodding curtly at the few passengers of color. When beverage service began, the pattern continued. "Would you care for a drink before takeoff?" Madison asked Travis, completely ignoring Olivia. "Scotch, neat," Travis replied without looking up from his phone. Madison nodded and then started to turn away. "Excuse me, Pai," Olivia said politely. "Could I have an orange juice? Please." Madison's smile vanished. "I'll see what we have," she replied coldly, as if orange juice were an exotic request on a morning flight. The flight filled, the doors closed, and the safety demonstration began. Travis finally put his phone away and reached for his laptop, except it wasn't in the seat pocket where he thought he'd placed it. His head snapped toward Olivia, who was now reviewing her presentation on her own identical laptop. "That's my laptop," he stated flatly, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Olivia looked up, surprised. "No, this is mine." "I put my MacBook right there," Travis insisted, pointing to the now empty seat pocket. "And now you're using it." "Sir, I've had my laptop out since before you boarded," Olivia explained calmly. "Mine has stickers on the back from my robotics team." She started to turn the laptop to show him, but Travis grabbed her wrist. "Don't try to walk off with my property," he snapped, his voice rising. Olivia maintained her composure. "Please let go of my wrist. This is my laptop. Look, I can log in to prove it's mine." Travis reluctantly released her, and Olivia quickly entered her password. The screen unlocked to reveal a desktop background photo of her with her robotics team, holding their regional championship trophy. "See, this is mine," she said, keeping her voice level. "Maybe your laptop is in your briefcase." Travis ignored her suggestion. "Madison," he called to the flight attendant. "This girl has my laptop." Madison appeared instantly, concern etched on her face. Concern for Travis, not Olivia. "What's happening here?" she asked. "I put my MacBook in the seat pocket, and now she's using it," Travis insisted. "Sir, this is my laptop," Olivia repeated, turning the screen to show Madison the robotics team photo. "I've had it out since I boarded. It has my stickers on it, and I just unlocked it with my password." Madison barely glanced at the evidence. "Sir, would you like me to call the air marshal?" "Yes," Travis said firmly. "I want my property back." "This is ridiculous," Olivia stated, still calm but increasingly frustrated. "Look, I can show you my student ID and the laptop serial number. They'll match the receipt in my email." Madison was already on the phone. "We have a theft situation in first class, seat 3A. Within minutes, an air marshal appeared, Ramon Diaz, a serious-looking Hispanic man in his early 40s wearing plain clothes but with an authoritative presence. "What's the situation?" he asked professionally. "This passenger claims her seatmate stole his laptop," Madison explained before Olivia could speak. "I did not," Olivia stated firmly. "This is my laptop. I can prove it." Ramon looked between them, assessing. "Sir, could you describe your laptop?" "Silver MacBook Air, 13-inch. Travis replied. "That describes millions of laptops," Olivia pointed out. "Mine has robotics team stickers on the back, and my name is in the system preferences." Ramon nodded. "Let's check both of those things." He examined the laptop, noting the stickers, then asked Olivia to open the system information panel, which clearly displayed Olivia Reynolds' MacBook. "Sir," Ramon addressed Travis, "are you sure you didn't put your laptop somewhere else?" Travis hesitated, then checked his briefcase. His expression shifted as he pulled out an identical MacBook. "Oh, I guess it was in here." "So this young lady didn't take anything," Ramon confirmed. "Apparently not," Travis muttered, not offering an apology. Ramon nodded. "Then the matter's resolved." But Madison wasn't satisfied. She pulled Ramon aside, whispering urgently while glancing back at Olivia with suspicion. Olivia could only catch fragments, acting suspicious before you arrived, and combative when questioned. Ramon's expression hardened. He returned to Olivia's seat. "Miss, I need you to gather your belongings and come with me." "What?" Why? Olivia asked, genuinely confused. We just established I didn't take anything. There are additional concerns about your behavior, Ramon stated flatly. We need to discuss this off the aircraft. What behavior? Olivia asked, maintaining her composure though her heart raced. I've been sitting here quietly. I did nothing wrong. Miss, please don't make this more difficult, Ramon said, his hand moving to his belt, where handcuffs were partially visible under his jacket. Several passengers had begun recording with their phones. One woman spoke up. She didn't do anything. This is ridiculous. Madison stepped forward. The captain has final authority on this aircraft, and he's requesting your removal for security concerns. Olivia took a deep breath, thinking of her father's advice. Stay dignified. Document everything. I'm complying under protest, was stated clearly, for the benefit of those recording. I've done nothing wrong. She carefully packed her laptop and stood. Ramon grasped her elbow firmly, guiding her toward the exit. Madison followed closely, her expression triumphant. As they reached the door, Olivia asked, May I call my father once we're in the terminal? After processing, Ramon replied curtly, in the jetway, away from passengers' cameras. Ramon's grip tightened. Hands behind your back. That's unnecessary, Olivia protested. I'm cooperating. Standard procedure, Ramon insisted, producing the handcuffs. For what crime? Olivia asked, her voice steady despite her fear. Instead of answering, Ramon roughly pulled her hands behind her back and applied the handcuffs. Too tight, cutting into her skin immediately. Olivia gasped at the sudden pain but didn't resist. Walk, Ramon ordered, pushing her forward into the terminal, where dozens of waiting passengers immediately noticed the handcuffed teenager being escorted by security. The public spectacle had begun. Communications disrupted. My phone is in my jacket pocket, Olivia stated as they marched her through the terminal. I need to call my father. Phones are restricted until processing, Ramon replied mechanically, steering her toward a security office at the end of the concourse. More passengers had begun recording the procession. The handcuffs bit deeper with each step, and Olivia felt warm liquid running down her fingers. Her wrists were bleeding, the metal cutting into her skin. These handcuffs are too tight, she said, keeping her voice controlled despite the pain. They're cutting me. Stop resisting and they won't hurt, Madison commented from behind them, though Olivia was walking cooperatively. I'm not resisting, Olivia replied evenly. They're physically too tight and causing injury. Ramon's grip on her arm tightened. Security office is just ahead. In a glass-walled conference room nearby, Marcus Reynolds was concluding the most important board meeting of the quarter. His company, Reynolds Aviation Holdings, was finalizing details for acquiring a significant stake in Sky Global Airlines, the very airline currently detaining his daughter. Marcus's executive assistant, Sofia Garcia, entered the room with urgency in her eyes. She approached discreetly and whispered in his ear, Sir, there's an emergency situation involving Olivia. A video is going viral showing her in handcuffs at Newark Airport. Marcus's expression remained composed, but his eyes sharpened. Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse me. There's an urgent family matter. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate calm. Mr. Jefferson will continue the presentation. Once outside the boardroom, Marcus's professional mask slipped. Show me. Sophia handed him her tablet. The Twitter video was already at 43,000 views and climbing rapidly. Olivia, handcuffed, blood visibly dripping from her wrists, being marched through Newark Airport by security, while a Sky Global flight attendant followed with a self-satisfied expression. Call the plane, get the flight number, the names of everyone involved. Marcus instructed, his voice dangerously quiet. Then get the jet ready. I'm going to Newark immediately. In the airport security office, Olivia sat handcuffed to a metal chair, her wrists now bleeding steadily. The small room contained only the chair, a metal table, and a camera in the corner. No one had offered her medical attention or water. The door opened, and Madison entered with Ramon and another officer. Your identification doesn't match our passenger verification system, Madison announced with satisfaction. My ID is valid, Olivia replied calmly. I've flown Sky Global 6 times this year alone. Yet today our system flagged you. Madison countered. Interesting coincidence. There's nothing coincidental about racial profiling, Olivia stated, her voice steady but firm. Madison's eyes narrowed. Playing the race card already typical. The blood on my wrist isn't a card I'm playing, Olivia replied. It's the result of excessive force for a non-crime. Outside the security office, the digital footprint of the incident was growing exponentially. Emma Sullivan's live stream had reached 78,000 viewers. 3 different videos of Olivia's removal were trending on Twitter. Local news stations had picked up the story, with headlines like, "Teen handcuffed at Newark Airport, excessive force alleged." The hashtag Justice for Olivia was spreading across the Northeast, with users identifying Sky Global Airlines and calling for boycotts. In the security office, Ramon shifted uncomfortably as he noticed the blood pooling around Olivia's wrists. "We should get medical for those cuts," he suggested to his colleague. After processing, Madison interjected, "We need to establish identity first." "My name is Olivia Reynolds," Olivia stated clearly. "I'm 17 years old, traveling to Boston for a scholarship interview at MIT. My father is Marcus Reynolds. I have the right to call him and to receive medical attention for these injuries." "Marcus Reynolds," the second officer repeated, something like recognition flickering in his eyes. "Probably made that up too." Madison scoffed, but with less certainty. Olivia's MIT interview was scheduled for 5 p.m. It was now 11:37 a.m. Even if they released her immediately, she would miss her original flight. The opportunity she had worked toward for years was slipping away because someone decided she didn't belong in first class. On his private jet, now taxiing for takeoff, Marcus Reynolds was on the phone with Sky Global's legal department. "Your employees have detained and injured my daughter without cause," he stated, his voice controlled but ice cold. "I want her released immediately, with medical attention for her injuries. I want the names of every person involved, and I want all security footage preserved. If these demands aren't met by the time I land, Reynolds Holdings will not only withdraw from our pending investment discussions, but will initiate legal proceedings against your airline for civil rights violations." The legal representative stammered, "Mr. Reynolds, I wasn't aware. We'll look into this immediately." "Don't look into it. Fix it. Now." Marcus ended the call and turned to his assistant. "Contact our legal team. I want them meeting me at the airport, and find out who's responsible for passenger profiling at Sky Global." In the security office, Olivia remained outwardly calm while cataloging every detail of her detention. The specific wording used by officers, the timestamps of key events, the refusal of medical care, her engineering mind, trained to observe and analyze, was creating a precise record that would soon become evidence. The door burst open, and a flustered man in a Sky Global management uniform rushed in. "Release her immediately, Turkey, he ordered. "Medical team is on the way. We haven't completed processing," Madison protested. "Now, the manager insisted, his face pale. "Her father is Marcus Reynolds." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Ramon quickly unlocked the handcuffs, revealing deep, bloody lacerations around Olivia's wrists. "Oh my God," the manager whispered. Seeing the injuries, Madison's triumphant expression melted into uncertainty. "Who is Marcus Reynolds?" "The CEO who was about to acquire a 30% stake in our airline," the manager replied tersely. "And whose daughter you've just publicly humiliated and injured." Olivia finally allowed herself a small, sad smile. "Now you believe I am who I say I am. Now you care about my bleeding wrists. What about all the people who don't have powerful parents? Who speaks for them?" The room fell silent, her words hanging in the air like an indictment. Part 2, the revelation and response. In the Sky Global Airlines boardroom, CEO Thomas Bradford's presentation on quarterly growth projections was interrupted by an urgent whisper from his assistant. His face paled visibly as he glanced at the tablet she handed him. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," Bradford announced, straightening his tie nervously. "We need a brief recess." He barely waited for acknowledgement before hurrying from the room. In the hallway, Bradford's composure cracked. "Tell me this isn't our airline handcuffing Marcus Reynolds' daughter." The viral video played on the tablet, the Sky Global logo clearly visible on Madison's uniform as she followed the bleeding teenager through the terminal. "It's been confirmed, sir," his assistant replied grimly. "And Mr. Reynolds has already contacted legal. He's en route to Newark now." God help us all, Bradford muttered, pulling out his phone. Get Parker off duty immediately. Find out who authorized this. And for God's sake, get that girl medical attention. 30,000 feet above Pennsylvania. Marcus Reynolds stared at his phone screen, watching the video of his daughter for the 10th time. The sight of blood dripping from her wrist as she walked with dignity through a gauntlet of stairs and cameras made his jaw clench with controlled fury. But it was her expression that affected him most deeply. The careful maintenance of composure his daughter had learned from him, now being tested in the cruelest way possible. Flight time is 27 minutes, sir, the pilot announced over the intercom. Newark has given us priority clearance. They'd better have, Marcus replied quietly. His phone buzzed with incoming text and calls, industry colleagues who recognized Olivia, reporters seeking statements, civil rights attorneys offering services. Marcus ignored them all, focusing instead on the team he was assembling at Newark to address the situation. On a secure line, he spoke with Dr. Eliza Jackson, the family's longtime physician. I want a full documentation of her injuries the moment I land. Photographs, medical assessment, everything. I'll be there, Dr. Jackson assured him. I've already reviewed the video. Those cuts may need stitches. Marcus next called James Harrington, the family's attorney. I want every available record of Sky Global's passenger screening protocols. Something flagged my daughter, and I want to know exactly what it was. We're already filing emergency requests for preservation of evidence, Harrington confirmed. And I've contacted the Department of Transportation's Civil Rights Division. Meanwhile, at Newark Airport, a medical team had finally been allowed to attend to Olivia's injuries. Dr. Sarah Miller carefully cleaned the deep cuts around her wrists. These should have been treated immediately, Miller said, her voice tight with professional concern. You've lost a significant amount of blood. I requested medical attention 3 times, Olivia replied calmly. It was denied until they realized who my father is. The doctor's eyes flashed with anger, but she maintained her professional demeanor. I'm documenting everything I observe. These injuries are consistent with handcuffs applied with excessive force and left on far too long. In the adjacent room, airport security officials were reviewing the surveillance footage with increasing alarm. The evidence was damning. Olivia had never acted aggressively, had cooperated fully, and had requested but been denied both medical care and the right to contact her father. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen, muttered Security Director Alan Peterson, watching Ramon apply the handcuffs with clearly excessive force, and potentially a civil rights violation. Ramon Diaz sat alone in a small office, reviewing his own actions with growing horror. He had followed Madison's lead, accepting her characterization of Olivia as aggressive and potentially dangerous, without question, why the answer made him deeply uncomfortable. Plane's landing now, announced Peterson, checking his phone. Reynolds will be here in 15 minutes. Throughout the terminal, the mood had shifted dramatically. The hashtag Justice for Olivia was now trending nationwide. 3 major news networks had picked up the story. Sky Global's stock had dropped 4.3% in just 2 hours as investors anticipated both the loss of Reynolds' investment and potential lawsuits. Emma Sullivan's live stream had passed 500,000 viewers and was being rebroadcast on major networks. In the comments section, viewers were identifying Madison Parker by name and calling for her termination. Marcus Reynolds' private jet touched down at precisely 1:17 p.m. Unlike his usual low-key arrivals, a phalanx of airline executives, security personnel, and medical staff awaited him on the tarmac. Thomas Bradford stepped forward, hand extended. Mr. Reynolds, I cannot express how deeply. Marcus walked past him without acknowledgement. Where is my daughter? This way, sir, offered a nervous airport official. She's receiving medical attention now. Marcus moved with purpose, his face a mask of controlled emotion. The assembled executives followed in his wake, their explanations and apologies falling on deaf ears. When Marcus entered the medical room and saw Olivia, her wrists bandaged, her white blouse stained with blood, but her posture still dignified, his careful composure finally cracked. He crossed the room in 3 strides and embraced her gently. Dad, she whispered, and for the first time that day, her voice trembled slightly. I'm here now, he assured her, examining her bandaged wrists with anguish in his eyes. Then, collecting himself, he turned to face the assembled airline representatives. I want every person responsible for this in front of me. Now, Mr. Reynolds, Bradford began, we're conducting a full investigation. Not tomorrow, not in an hour. Now. Marcus's voice was quiet but carried unmistakable authority. Within minutes, Madison Parker was brought to the room, her earlier confidence replaced by visible apprehension. Ramon Diaz followed, his expression somber. Are these the individuals who detained and injured my daughter? Marcus asked Olivia. Yes, she confirmed. The flight attendant accused me of theft after another passenger mistakenly claimed I had his laptop. When he found his actual laptop, she still insisted I be removed. The officer applied the handcuffs too tightly and ignored my request for medical attention. Marcus turned to Madison, his gaze level. Explain yourself. Madison swallowed hard. Sir, we have procedures for suspicious passenger behavior. Define suspicious. Marcus interrupted. Be specific. Madison faltered. Her boarding pass had a security flag. What flag? Marcus pressed. The red coat in the corner. Madison explained. It indicates potential security concerns. Marcus turned to Bradford. Show me the criteria for these red codes. Bradford hesitated. That's proprietary security information. Not anymore, Marcus replied, his voice dangerously calm. My legal team is already filing requests under federal transportation discrimination laws. You can show me now or explain it to a federal judge tomorrow. Bradford nodded to an assistant, who reluctantly produced a tablet displaying Sky Global's passenger screening protocols. Marcus reviewed it silently, his expression darkening. Demographics as risk factors, he finally said, looking up. Race listed as a statistical indicator for additional screening. This is institutionalized discrimination disguised as security. Industry standard practices, Bradford weakly defended. Not for long, Marcus promised. His eyes returned to Madison. And you took it upon yourself to interpret these codes as authorization for public humiliation and physical restraint. Madison's composure cracked completely. I was following procedures. The system flagged her, so I watched her more closely. When the laptop situation happened, which was resolved, Olivia interjected calmly. When the passenger found his actual laptop, I felt she was being uncooperative. Madison finished lamely. Uncooperative, Marcus repeated, or just unwilling to accept being wrongfully accused. Madison had no answer. Marcus turned to Ramon. And you, officer, you applied handcuffs so tightly they cut into my daughter's skin, then denied her medical care. Ramon met Marcus's gaze directly. I have no excuse, sir. I failed in my duty to assess the situation independently. I followed Miss Parker's characterization without question, and I used force that was neither necessary nor appropriate. He turned to Olivia. I am deeply sorry for my actions and the injuries I caused you. His straightforward acknowledgement stood in stark contrast to Madison's defensive posture. Marcus nodded slightly, then addressed the entire group. Here's what happens next. My daughter will receive complete medical treatment. Every person involved in this incident will be interviewed separately by my legal team. All security footage, communications, and passenger screening protocols will be preserved as evidence. He turned to Bradford. And our acquisition discussions are suspended indefinitely. Bradford blanched. Mr. Reynolds, please reconsider. We can reach an accommodation. This isn't about accommodation, Marcus replied. This is about transformation. Sky Global just became the test case for how the aviation industry handles racial bias. Either you become the leader in solving this problem, or you become the cautionary example. As if to emphasize his point, Bradford's phone chimed with a news alert. Sky Global's stock had now fallen 6.7% as hashtag justice for Olivia continued trending worldwide. Marcus gently placed his arm around Olivia's shoulders. Let's get you proper medical attention. As they walked out together, reporters had gathered at the security checkpoint. Cameras flashed as the powerful CEO escorted his injured daughter through the terminal. Mr. Reynolds, will you be suing Sky Global? Shouted one reporter. Marcus stopped briefly. This isn't about lawsuits. It's about ensuring that no passenger ever again has their dignity violated or their safety compromised because of how they look. He looked down at Olivia with pride. My daughter maintained her composure and her principles today under circumstances that would break many adults. The question isn't what we'll do to Sky Global. The question is what Sky Global will do to fix a system that allowed this to happen. With that, they continued walking, leaving the airline executives to face the press alone. Airport confrontation in the airport's executive conference room. The atmosphere crackled with tension. Marcus Reynolds stood at the window, his reflection superimposed over the tarmac where aircraft continued their routine operations, unaware of the seismic shift occurring inside the building. Behind him sat Thomas Bradford, now visibly sweating despite the room's aggressive air conditioning. Beside Bradford were Sky Global's chief security officer, legal director, and head of customer experience, an emergency assembly of executives with the unenviable task of explaining why their airline had handcuffed, injured, and publicly humiliated the daughter of one of aviation's most powerful figures. The passenger screening algorithm was implemented industry-wide after 2001. The security officer explained, sliding a document across the table. It uses multiple factors to assess potential risks, including race, Marcus asked without turning from the window. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Demographic factors are one of many variables, the security officer finally admitted, but they're not supposed to be determinative on their own. Marcus turned slowly. Yet my daughter's boarding pass was marked with a red code despite having no criminal record, no behavioral issues, and a history of uneventful flights with your airline. There was a technical, don't, Marcus interrupted softly. Don't insult either of us by calling systematic discrimination a technical issue. He approached the table, placing his palms flat on its polished surface. Here's what I find most disturbing. The system flagged my daughter, but it was your employee who chose to escalate a resolved misunderstanding into a public humiliation. It was your security officer who applied handcuffs so tightly they cut her skin. It was your staff who denied her medical attention until they realized who her father is. Bradford attempted to regain control. Mr. Reynolds, we're prepared to offer a very generous settlement. I don't want your money, Marcus stated flatly. I want transformation. He straightened, buttoning his suit jacket. My team is conducting interviews now. I expect complete cooperation. Every email, every training manual, every algorithm parameter will be examined. Some of that is proprietary information, the legal director objected. Then you have a choice to make. Marcus replied, voluntary transparency or federal investigation. The Department of Transportation is already interested in this case. As if on cue, Marcus's phone chimed with an incoming text. He glanced at it, then looked back at the executives. My daughter's medical examination has documented lacerations requiring 17 stitches total between both wrists. The doctor has classified these as injuries resulting from excessive force. The color drained from Bradford's face. Mr. Reynolds, please, we can work together to address these concerns. That's exactly what we're going to do, Marcus agreed, his voice measured. But not on your terms. Not behind closed doors with confidential settlements. The whole industry is watching now. He walked to the door, then paused. One more thing. My daughter was traveling to an MIT scholarship interview that she'll now miss because of your employees' actions. Actions that were based on an algorithm that systematically disadvantages people who look like her. We'll arrange another flight immediately, Bradford offered quickly. That's not the point, Marcus replied. The point is that your system cost her an opportunity she earned through years of hard work. Think about how many other opportunities have been stolen from people who don't have powerful parents to intervene. With that, he left the room, leaving the executives in stunned silence. In another part of the airport, Olivia sat in a private medical suite, Dr. Eliza Jackson carefully suturing the deeper cuts on her wrists. You'll have some scarring, Dr. Jackson informed her gently. But with proper care, it should fade significantly over time. Olivia nodded, watching the precise movements of the needle. Physical scars heal, she observed quietly. It's the other kind that concerns me. Jackson paused, meeting Olivia's eyes. Your father told me about the MIT interview. I'm so sorry. It's not just about my interview, Olivia replied. It's about all the people this happens to who don't have doctors and lawyers showing up within hours. Who gets handcuffed for their laptop choice? Who misses opportunities because someone decided they don't belong? Before Dr. Byron, Jackson could respond. There was a soft knock at the door. James Harrington, the Reynolds family attorney, entered with a tablet in hand. Olivia, when you're ready, I'd like to review the sequence of events with you, he said gently. Take your time. I'm ready now, she replied, straightening despite her bandaged wrists. I've been mentally documenting everything since it began. Harrington nodded, unsurprised by her composure. Madison Parker has been suspended pending investigation. Ramon Diaz has voluntarily provided a statement acknowledging excessive force. And the red code system, Olivia asked. Your father is addressing that as we speak. Harrington assured her. We've already filed requests for all documentation related to passenger screening protocols. A different knock sounded, more hesitant, almost reluctant. The door opened to reveal Ramon Diaz, now without his security credentials. Excuse me, he said softly. I wanted to apologize directly. He glanced at the bandages around Olivia's wrists, and genuine remorse filled his expression. There's no excuse for what I did. I failed to assess the situation properly. I used inappropriate force, and I denied you medical care you clearly needed. Olivia studied him carefully. Why did you believe her assessment of me so readily? Ramon's shoulders slumped slightly. I've been asking myself the same question for the past 2 hours. The honest answer is that I defaulted to assumptions I didn't even realize I held. When she called you aggressive, I didn't question it, though nothing in your behavior matched that description. His candor surprised her. What happens to you now? I've been suspended and I expect termination to follow, he replied. As it should, but before that happens, I've provided a complete statement about the incident and the culture that enabled it. There are structural problems here that go far beyond any single employee, Olivia nodded thoughtfully. Thank you for your honesty. As Ramon left, Marcus entered, his expression softening when he saw his daughter. MIT called, he said, sitting beside her. Professor Sinclair heard about what happened. They're rescheduling your interview for next week. Relief washed over Olivia's face. Really, Marcus confirmed. In fact, she seemed particularly interested in your experience today. Something about real-world engineering challenges in complex systems. Olivia's analytical mind immediately made the connection. Social systems are still systems, she mused. They can be studied, modeled, and improved like any other. A spark of inspiration flickered in her eyes, the same expression Marcus had seen countless times when she solved a difficult problem or found an elegant solution. Even now, with bandaged wrists and a traumatic day behind her, Olivia's brilliant mind was already transforming pain into possibility. Dad, she said suddenly, sitting up straighter, what if we could create an algorithm that does the opposite of their red code system, one that detects patterns of potential bias before they escalate into incidents like this? Marcus smiled slightly, recognizing the familiar intensity in his daughter's expression. I think that's exactly the kind of thinking we need right now. In the terminal outside, the news cycle was accelerating. National networks had picked up Emma Sullivan's live stream footage. Side-by-side comparisons showed Olivia's bleeding wrists next to Madison's dismissive expression. Aviation experts were being interviewed about passenger profiling practices. Civil rights attorneys were discussing potential class action implications. Sky Global's stock had now fallen 8.9%, erasing nearly $400 million in market value in a single afternoon. And through it all, the hashtag Justice Forum, Olivia continued to trend, no longer just a call for individual accountability, but evolving into a demand for systemic change across the entire industry. Immediate aftermath. The Reynolds family town car moved smoothly through Newark's evening traffic, a bubble of quiet amid the media storm now engulfing Sky Global Airlines. Olivia sat beside her father, her bandaged wrists resting on her lap, her expression thoughtful as she gazed out the window. 17 stitches, Marcus said quietly, breaking the silence. The doctor says you'll have some scarring. Small price for exposing a broken system, Olivia replied, her voice steady. She turned to her father. I kept thinking about what you always told me, about dignity being something no one can take unless you surrender it. Marcus reached across and gently squeezed her hand, careful to avoid the bandages. You showed more dignity today than most adults manage in a lifetime. His phone chimed with another notification. Marcus checked it briefly, then put it away with a slight frown. What is it? Olivia asked. Sky Global's board has called an emergency meeting, he replied. Stock down almost 9%. Bradford is trying to salvage the acquisition deal. Is it salvageable? Olivia asked. Marcus studied his daughter thoughtfully. That depends. On whether they're willing to actually change, Olivia finished for him. Not just pay for my injuries, but fix the system that caused them. Exactly, Marcus smiled faintly. Proud of her insight. The car turned onto their street, where several news vans had already gathered outside their home. Reporters rushed toward the vehicle as it approached the driveway. You don't have to speak to them, Marcus assured her. Olivia straightened her shoulders. Yes, I do. Someone has to put a human face on this issue. It might as well be someone who understands both the human and the technical aspects. Marcus nodded, respecting her decision. As the car stopped, he stepped out first, then helped Olivia exit. Camera flashes erupted immediately. Olivia, how does it feel to be racially profiled? Mr. Reynolds, will you sue Sky Global? Are those bandages from the handcuffs? Olivia stepped forward, her voice clear and measured. Today, I experienced something that happens to countless travelers who don't have influential parents or viral videos to protect them. I was flagged by an algorithm, accused of theft after a simple misunderstanding, handcuffed until I bled, and denied medical care. She raised her bandaged wrists slightly. These injuries will heal, but the system that caused them needs more than bandages. It needs complete rebuilding. This isn't about me or any single incident. It's about ensuring that every passenger is treated with basic human dignity, regardless of how they look or what assumptions others might make about them. A reporter called out, Will you accept Sky Global's settlement offer? Olivia glanced at her father, then back to the cameras. We're not interested in private settlements that hide the problem. We're interested in transparent solutions that fix it, not just at one airline, but across the entire industry. Another journalist pressed. What about Madison Parker? Should she be fired? Individual accountability tatters, Olivia acknowledged them. But focusing solely on one employee misses the larger point. Ms. Parker made terrible choices, but she was operating within a system that encouraged profiling and gave her the power to act on unfounded suspicions. We need to address both the individual actions and the broken system. With that, Marcus guided Olivia toward their door. That's all for now. My daughter has had a traumatic day and needs rest. Inside their home, the quiet was a relief after the chaos of the day. Olivia sank onto the living room sofa, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt. Marcus brought her a glass of water and her pain medication. The MI interview, she said suddenly. I still need to prepare. Tomorrow, Marcus insisted gently. Tonight, you rest. Olivia's phone had been buzzing constantly since being returned to her, hundreds of messages from friends who'd seen the videos, from strangers offering support, from media seeking interviews. One message caught her attention, from Professor Amanda Sinclair at MIT Mellis. Reynolds, I was deeply disturbed by today's events. Your rescheduled interview is confirmed for next Friday, but I'm particularly interested in discussing how engineering principles might address the systematic problems you experienced. Your composed response in a crisis suggests exactly the kind of innovative thinking our program values. Olivia read the message to her father, a small smile forming. See, systems thinking applies everywhere. Marcus nodded, recognizing the spark in his daughter's eyes, the same creative energy he'd seen when she built her first robot or solved a complex math problem years ahead of her grade level. Olivia's analytical mind was already transforming personal trauma into a systematic challenge to be solved. Dad, she said suddenly, sitting up straighter. What if this is actually my MIT project? Not just the propulsion system I designed, but a new algorithm, one that detects bias patterns and prevents incidents like this before they happen. That sounds like turning pain into purpose, Marcus replied, recognizing the healing power of her approach. What would you call it? Olivia thought for a moment. Dignity guard, she said finally, because dignity is exactly what these systems should be protecting. As they talked through the initial concept, Olivia's phone continued buzzing with notifications. The hashtag Justice for Olivia had been joined by hashtag Dignity in Travel and hashtag End Travel Profiling. Aviation forums were filled with similar stories from other travelers. Civil rights organizations were citing the incident as evidence of systematic discrimination. In Sky Global's emergency board meeting, Thomas Bradford was fighting for his professional survival. The Reynolds acquisition was going to increase our market value by at least 15%. One board member reminded him tersely, "Instead, we're down nearly 9% in a single day. That's a 24% swing. Thomas, hundreds of millions in shareholder value gone. We can recover," Bradford insisted. Reynolds hasn't completely walked away. He wants systematic changes. At what cost? Another board member challenged. At far less cost than ignoring the problem. Bradford countered. Our preliminary review already shows disturbing patterns in our passenger screening protocols. If we don't address this voluntarily, we'll face regulatory intervention, class action, lawsuits, and continued public relations damage. The board chair leaned forward. What exactly is Reynolds proposing? He wants complete transparency on our screening algorithms, overhaul of training protocols, independent auditing of passenger treatment metrics, and development of new systems to prevent bias incidents. That's a massive undertaking, objected the CFO. It's also an opportunity, Bradford argued. We can lead this change or be dragged along by it. Every airline uses similar systems. The first to fix the problem gains both moral high ground and market advantage. As the debate continued, Madison Parker sat alone in her apartment, watching her professional life unravel on social media. Her name and image were everywhere, alongside phrases like racist flight attendant and caused teens bleeding injuries. Her phone had been ringing with abusive calls, forcing her to silence it. The airline's HR department had called to inform her of her indefinite suspension pending investigation. Her union representative suggested she prepare for termination. Madison poured another glass of wine, her hands shaking slightly. How had enforcing what she thought were security protocols turned into career suicide? The question plagued her, but the answer remained elusive, or perhaps too uncomfortable to confront directly. Her laptop chimed with an email notification. Another journalist seeking comment. She ignored it, but not before noticing the headline in the preview, Sky Global Flight Attendant's History of Passenger Complaints Revealed. Someone had leaked her personnel file, showing a pattern of complaints predominantly from passengers of color, complaints she had dismissed as people playing the race card when they didn't get special treatment. For the first time, looking at the data laid out so clearly, Madison began to consider a disturbing possibility that she might be part of the problem. Initial corporate response. The Sky Global Crisis Management team assembled in the company's Manhattan headquarters at 7:00 a.m. the following morning. Sleep-deprived executives clutched coffee cups as they filed into the conference room, where CEO Thomas Bradford had been working through the night. Our stock closed down 8.9% yesterday. Bradford began without preamble. Pre-market trading suggests another 2-3% drop when the markets open. More importantly, our brand sentiment score has dropped 47 points in 24 hours, the steepest decline in company history. He gestured to the wall of monitors displaying social media trends, news headlines, and market data. One screen showed the viral video of Olivia's bleeding wrists, now at over 7 million views. This isn't just about one incident or one employee, Bradford continued. Our initial internal review confirms what Reynolds alleged. Our passenger screening system disproportionately flags minorities, especially in premium cabins. The head of communications raised her hand. We've prepared a standard statement expressing regret for the isolated incident, highlighting our commitment to diversity. And, no, Bradford interrupted firmly. Standard responses won't work here. The evidence is too damning, too public. We need to acknowledge the systematic nature of the problem. That opens us to massive liability, objected the legal director. We already have massive liability, Bradford countered. The question is whether we handle it reactively through lawsuits or proactively through system reform. He pulled up an email on the main screen. This arrived from Marcus Reynolds an hour ago. He's proposing a partnership rather than litigation, conditional on complete transparency and commitment to systemic change. The chief technology officer leaned forward, reading the email. He wants full access to our algorithm parameters. That's proprietary information. It's also potentially discriminatory information, Bradford pointed out, which means it's legally indefensible. The chief human resources officer spoke up. What about Parker? The union is already positioning for her defense, claiming she followed established protocols. The footage clearly shows otherwise, Bradford replied. The laptop issue was resolved before she escalated the situation, and the recorded comments about Olivia being trash and not knowing her place go far beyond any protocol we've established. Terminal Security has submitted their preliminary report on Officer Diaz, added the head of security. He's admitted to using excessive force and failing to provide medical attention. He's also provided a detailed statement about systematic issues in our security protocols. Bradford nodded. At least someone's taking responsibility. We need to do the same at a corporate level. He turned to the communications director. Draft a new statement acknowledging systematic problems in our passenger screening, announcing a comprehensive review, and committing to transparent reforms. That's essentially admitting guilt, she protested. That's acknowledging reality, Bradford corrected. The alternative is looking tone-deaf while evidence of discrimination piles up in public view. As the crisis team debated strategy, Olivia Reynolds sat at her desk at home, her bandaged wrists a constant reminder of yesterday's trauma. But rather than dwelling on the injuries, she was channeling her energy into research, her laptop screen filled with technical papers on algorithm bias detection. Marcus entered with a cup of tea, setting it beside her. You should be resting, he said gently. This is more healing than rest, Olivia replied, not looking up from her screen. I've been analyzing aviation incident reports involving passenger removals. The pattern is even more pronounced than I expected. Look at this. She turned her screen to show her father a data visualization she had created overnight, a striking correlation between passenger demographics and forced removals, with minorities in premium cabins showing dramatically higher rates of security interventions. You did this since last night, Marcus asked, impressed despite his concern. I couldn't sleep, Olivia admitted, but at least the insomnia was productive. I've been thinking about Dignity Guard. What if we created an algorithm that could detect potential bias incidents before they escalate, a system that flags unusual patterns in employee-passenger interactions and provides real-time intervention? Marcus studied the concept, recognizing its potential. That's turning defense into offense, he observed. Instead of just fixing Sky Global's discriminatory algorithm, creating a new one that actively prevents bias. Exactly, Olivia said, enthusiasm brightening her eyes. And not just for one airline. This could be implemented industry-wide. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Professor Amanda Sinclair from MIT. Ms. Reynolds, the professor began when Olivia answered. First, let me say how disturbed I am by what happened to you. How are you feeling? I'm doing better, thank you, Olivia replied. Looking forward to our rescheduled interview next week. Actually, that's why I'm calling, Professor Sinclair continued. The committee has reviewed your application materials and the circumstances of yesterday's incident. We're prepared to offer you provisional acceptance to our aerospace engineering program, contingent only on a discussion of your new project concept. New project, Olivia questioned. Your father mentioned you're developing an algorithm to address bias in transportation systems, Professor Sinclair explained. We find that direction extremely compelling, a perfect intersection of technical innovation and social impact. We'd like to offer resources to help develop it. After the call ended, Olivia sat in stunned silence for a moment. They're offering me early admission, she told her father, and resources to develop Dignity Guard. Marcus smiled, pride evident in his expression. Turning trauma into innovation. Your mother would be so proud. Meanwhile, at Sky Global headquarters, Bradford's crisis team had made a pivotal decision. The company would issue a statement acknowledging systematic flaws in their passenger screening protocols, announce a comprehensive review led by independent experts, and commit to industry-leading reforms. Reynolds is right, Bradford told his executive team. We can either lead this change or be destroyed by it. If every major carrier uses similar systems, then the first to fix the problem gains enormous advantage. The chief marketing officer nodded reluctantly. Our research shows younger travelers in particular are extremely sensitive to social justice issues. This could actually become a competitive advantage if we handle it right. It's more than a marketing opportunity, Bradford insisted. It's a moral imperative. No passenger should ever be treated the way Olivia Reynolds was treated in our care. As if to emphasize his point, another email arrived from Marcus Reynolds, containing a simple attachment. Dr. Bob Jackson's medical report detailing Olivia's injuries, including high-resolution photographs of the lacerations requiring 17 stitches. Bradford forwarded the email to the entire executive team with a one-line message: "This is why we must change. Not incrementally, but fundamentally." For the first time since the crisis began, a sense of clarity settled over the room. Sky Global would not hide from its failures. It would confront them openly and commit to transformation. Whether that transformation would be enough to save the company and the Reynolds acquisition deal remained to be seen. Missed opportunity. Professor Amanda Sinclair sat in her office at MIT, reviewing the portfolio Olivia Reynolds had submitted months earlier. The technical brilliance was undeniable. Advanced propulsion concepts that demonstrated understanding well beyond undergraduate level. Innovative approaches to fuel efficiency that industry veterans hadn't considered. Her colleague, Professor Richard Martinez, knocked on the open door. "I saw the news," he said, entering. "That was our applicant, the one with the handcuffs." Amanda nodded grimly. "Olivia Reynolds. Her engineering concepts are extraordinary." "What's happening with her interview?" Richard asked, taking a seat across from Amanda. "I've rescheduled for next week, but honestly, after reviewing her materials again, the interview is a formality. We'd be lucky to have her." Amanda turned her computer screen to show Richard the propulsion system Olivia had designed. "Look at this approach to thermal management. It's graduate-level work, and she's 17. Richard studied the design, eyebrows rising in appreciation. "Impressive, but I'm more intrigued by what her father mentioned. This bias detection algorithm she's conceptualizing. Talk about real-world application." "That's why I called her this morning," Amanda confirmed. "I offered provisional acceptance and departmental resources for the Dignity Guard project. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking that connects technical expertise with social impact." "Smart move," Richard agreed. "Every engineering school in the country will be after her once this story fully breaks." Across campus, the MIT Student Association was already organizing a hashtag Justice for Olivia Solidarity event. Students were sharing the viral video, expressing outrage at the treatment she'd received, and highlighting similar experiences faced by minority students during travel. In the Reynolds household, Olivia sat at the dining room table, her original MIT presentation materials spread before her. The advanced propulsion system she'd spent months perfecting now seemed almost secondary to the new project taking shape in her mind. Her father entered with lunch, setting it beside her. "You need to eat, even while revolutionizing the aviation industry," he said with a small smile. Olivia looked up, her eyes bright with purpose despite the fatigue evident on her face. "I've been thinking about how Dignity Guard would actually work. It needs to operate at multiple levels simultaneously." She pointed to her diagrams. "At the system level, it would analyze aggregate data to identify problematic patterns, which employees have disproportionate incident rates with minorities, which routes show unusual discrepancies in passenger treatment, which algorithms produce biased outcomes." Marcus nodded, following her logic. "And at the individual level, real-time intervention," Olivia explained. "The system would flag potential bias incidents as they develop and provide immediate alternative response protocols. For instance, if a first-class passenger is challenged about their seating multiple times despite having valid documentation, the system would alert supervisors to a potential bias situation." "Who would implement something like this?" Marcus asked. "Airlines have invested millions in their current systems. They won't abandon them overnight." "They might if the alternative is worse," Olivia pointed out. "Sky Global's stock is still falling. Their reputation is in tatters. They need more than a PR solution. They need a systematic one." Marcus considered this. Bradford called again this morning. "They're prepared to make significant changes as a condition of continuing acquisition talks." Olivia looked up sharply. "You're still considering acquiring them?" "After what happened, I'm considering transforming them," Marcus clarified. "Sometimes the most effective way to change a system is from within. If Reynolds Holdings acquires Sky Global, we can implement Dignity Guard as a condition of the deal, making them the test case for industry-wide reform." Olivia nodded slowly, understanding the strategic thinking. "A case study in how to transform corporate culture through technological and policy innovation." "Exactly, Marcus confirmed. "And that's where your MIT project comes in. What if Dignity Guard becomes the foundation of your work there? A real-world application of engineering principles to solve a complex social problem. With Sky Global as the initial implementation partner, Olivia added, the pieces falling into place. That's brilliant. Meanwhile, Madison Parker sat in Sky Global's HR office, facing the head of employee relations across a sterile table. Her personnel file lay open between them, revealing a pattern that Madison herself had never acknowledged. 12 passenger complaints in the past year, 10 from minorities, 7 specifically mentioning discriminatory treatment. Do you see the pattern, Miss Parker? Asked Elena Rodriguez, the HR director, her tone professional but firm. Those passengers were being difficult, Madison insisted, though with less conviction than before. I treat everyone the same. Elena slid a tablet across the table. This is the security footage from yesterday. I'd like you to watch it and narrate your actions and decisions as objectively as possible. Madison reluctantly watched the footage, her dismissive attitude toward Olivia, her immediate acceptance of Travis Whitfield's accusation without investigation, her continued insistence on removing Olivia even after the misunderstanding was clarified. Seen from the outside, her bias was painfully obvious. I was following security protocols, she said weakly. Were you? Elena challenged. Because our protocols require verifying claims before escalation, considering alternative explanations, and using minimum necessary intervention. None of that happened here. Madison fell silent, the reality of her actions becoming impossible to deny. Sky Global is implementing comprehensive reforms, Elena continued. We need to determine if you can be part of that transformation or if your time with the company has concluded. Are you firing me? Madison asked, her voice small. That depends on you, Elena replied. On whether you can acknowledge the role your own biases played in this incident and commit to the difficult work of addressing them. For the first time, Madison allowed herself to consider the possibility that the problem wasn't difficult passengers playing the race card. It was her own unexamined prejudices affecting her perception and behavior. What would that involve? She asked finally. Comprehensive bias training, certainly, Elena explained. But also direct accountability to the communities most affected by these issues. If you're serious about change, it won't be comfortable or easy. Madison took a deep breath. I never thought of myself as prejudiced, she admitted. But watching that footage, I can't deny there's a pattern. It was a small first step, but a necessary one. Across town, Ramon Diaz sat in his apartment, composing a letter to Olivia Reynolds. Unlike Madison, he had immediately acknowledged his failure, both the excessive force that injured Olivia and the underlying bias that led him to accept Madison's characterization without question. I am writing to apologize again for my actions, he typed carefully. But more importantly, to inform you that I have provided a detailed statement to both Sky Global Management and the Department of Transportation regarding the systematic issues I've observed in our security protocols. Your dignity and composure in the face of injustice inspired me to speak up about problems I've witnessed but failed to address for too long. Ramon had already decided that regardless of whether he kept his job, he would advocate for reform in aviation security practices. Olivia's question, why did you believe her assessment of me so readily, had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his own implicit biases and the system that reinforced them. As these individual reckonings unfolded, the broader implications of the incident continued to expand. The hashtag justice. For Olivia had evolved into a movement, with travelers sharing similar experiences across social media platforms. Civil rights organizations were calling for industry-wide review of airline screening practices. The Department of Transportation had opened a formal investigation into potential systematic discrimination. What had begun as one teenager's traumatic experience was catalyzing a long-overdue conversation about dignity, respect, and equal treatment in commercial aviation. And at the center of it all was Olivia Reynolds, not just as a victim seeking justice, but as an innovator developing solutions. The opportunity she had missed due to Sky Global's actions, her original MIT interview, had transformed into something far more significant, the chance to create lasting change across an entire industry. Part 3, the transformation. The Sky Global boardroom fell silent as Marcus Reynolds concluded his presentation. For 2 hours, he had methodically laid out the evidence of systematic discrimination within the airline's operations. From the algorithm parameters that disproportionately flagged minorities to the training materials that emphasized behavioral indicators with clear racial undertones. "Gentlemen, ladies," Marcus said, closing his tablet with deliberate calm, "what happened to my daughter was not an isolated incident. It was the predictable outcome of systems you've implemented and reinforced over years." Thomas Bradford shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mr. Reynolds, we acknowledge these serious concerns. That's why we've suspended the red code system pending review." "Suspension isn't transformation," Marcus interrupted, "and review isn't reform. I'm not here to negotiate cosmetic changes that allow the same patterns to continue under different names." He stood, buttoning his suit jacket, a power move that drew all eyes to him. "Reynolds Holdings was prepared to acquire a 30% stake in Sky Global because we saw potential for growth and innovation. That opportunity still exists, but only if you're prepared to become industry leaders in equitable treatment." "What exactly are you proposing?" asked Victoria Hernandez, the board chair, her expression cautious but engaged. Marcus nodded to his assistant, who distributed tablets to each board member. "Dignity Guard," he stated simply, "a comprehensive approach to preventing bias incidents before they occur, measuring equitable treatment across all passenger interactions, and transforming corporate culture from compliance to commitment." The board members scrolled through the presentation, expressions ranging from skepticism to intrigue. "This would require significant investment," noted the CFO, frowning at projected costs. "Less than what you've already lost in market value," Marcus pointed out, "and significantly less than what you stand to lose through class action lawsuits, federal penalties, and continued reputational damage." Bradford leaned forward. "Some of these changes would put us at a competitive disadvantage if we're the only carrier implementing them." "Actually," Marcus countered, "early adoption gives you first-mover advantage in what will inevitably become an industry-wide transformation. The Department of Transportation is already investigating discriminatory practices across multiple airlines. Federal regulations will follow. The question is whether you lead this change or are dragged along by it." Victoria studied the proposal carefully. "This goes far beyond addressing passenger screening algorithms. You're talking about comprehensive cultural transformation, from hiring practices to training protocols to accountability metrics. Because the problem goes deeper than any single algorithm," Marcus confirmed. "The technology simply amplified existing biases within your corporate culture." The chief technology officer raised his hand. "This Dignity Guard system, it's theoretical at this point." "Correct. We'd be investing in an unproven concept. My daughter is already developing the core architecture with MIT's support," Marcus replied. "But yes, full implementation would require your commitment to being the test case. That's the opportunity here, to transform from cautionary example to industry leader." The boardroom fell silent as the executives considered the proposal. The choice before them was stark: commit to fundamental transformation or face the consequences of continued resistance. Victoria finally broke the silence. "What are your terms, Mr. Reynolds?" "Complete transparency," Marcus began. "Independent auditing of all passenger treatment metrics, implementation of Dignity Guard across all operations within 6 months, and public commitment to industry-leading standards for equitable treatment." "And in return," Bradford asked, "Reynolds Holdings resumes acquisition discussions at a 15% discount to pre-incident valuation." Marcus stated, "We provide technical expertise for implementation. And most importantly, Sky Global becomes the case study in how to transform corporate culture rather than the example of what happens when you fail." Victoria glanced around the table, reading the room. Most executives appeared to be calculating the financial implications, weighing the cost of transformation against the continued bleeding of market value and reputation. "We need to discuss this privately," she finally said. Marcus nodded, gathering his materials. "Of course, but understand that this offer isn't open-ended. Public pressure is mounting. Federal investigators are already requesting documentation. Other airlines are watching closely. The time for meaningful action is now, not after months of committees and consultations." As Marcus left the boardroom, the executives immediately launched into heated debate. Some argued for accepting the proposal immediately, citing the continued stock slide and cancellation rates. Others raised concerns about implementation challenges and competitive implications. Bradford finally cut through the noise. Let's be absolutely clear about our situation. Our stock has fallen 12% in 3 days. Cancellation rates are up 17%. Social media sentiment is overwhelmingly negative. The Department of Transportation has opened a formal investigation, and multiple class action firms are preparing lawsuits. He pulled up the viral video of Olivia's bleeding wrists, now at over 15 million views. This isn't going away with standard crisis management techniques. We can't PR our way out of this. Victoria nodded slowly. Reynolds is right about one thing: transformation is our only viable path forward. The question is whether we control that transformation or have it imposed upon us. In a separate conference room, Marcus was on a video call with Olivia, who was working with Professor Sinclair on the Dignity Guard framework. The board is deliberating, he informed her. Bradford seems supportive, but there's resistance from some of the old guard. They're calculating whether discrimination is still profitable. Olivia observed with wisdom beyond her years. Exactly, Marcus agreed. Our job is to demonstrate that it isn't, that equity isn't just morally right, but economically sound. Olivia held up her tablet, showing a flowchart of the Dignity Guard system architecture. Professor Sinclair and I have been refining the intervention protocols. The system needs to be capable of both pattern recognition across aggregate data and real-time response to developing incidents. How soon could a prototype be ready? Marcus asked. With adequate resources, 4 to 6 weeks for the initial version, Olivia estimated. But full implementation would require integration with existing systems, comprehensive staff training, and cultural reinforcement. Their conversation was interrupted by a message from Victoria Hernandez. The board has reached a decision. Please return to the boardroom. Marcus found the executive subdued but resolute when he re-entered. Victoria stood to address him directly. Marcus Reynolds, we voted to accept your proposal with a condition of our own, she stated formally. We want Olivia Reynolds directly involved in the implementation process, not just her algorithm, but her perspective as both a victim of our failures and an innovator of solutions. Marcus raised an eyebrow. My daughter is 17 and about to begin university studies. Precisely, Bradford interjected. She represents exactly the perspective we need, the future of both aviation and social expectations. Her experience gives her moral authority. Her technical brilliance gives her practical value. Marcus considered the request. I'll discuss it with Olivia, but if she agrees, her involvement would be as a paid consultant with full autonomy to speak publicly about both problems and progress. Agreed, Victoria confirmed. We don't want a silent partner or a controlled voice. We want authentic transformation, even when that process is uncomfortable. Marcus extended his hand. Then we have the beginning of an understanding. As they shook hands, both recognized the significance of the moment. Sky Global was committing not just to algorithmic adjustments or policy tweaks, but to fundamental reevaluation of its entire approach to passenger treatment and corporate culture. The transformation had begun. Whether it would succeed remained to be seen, but the alternative, continuing to defend discriminatory systems in an increasingly aware marketplace, was no longer viable. The story of Olivia Reynolds and her bleeding wrists had forced an industry to confront its ugliest assumptions and practices. Now the real work of creating something better could begin. Olivia's innovation. The MIT engineering lab hummed with focused energy as Olivia Reynolds adjusted parameters on her simulation model. 3 weeks had passed since the Sky Global incident, and her wrists still bore the marks of her ordeal, fading scars that served as constant reminders of why this work mattered. The pattern recognition accuracy is improving, observed Professor Amanda Sinclair, studying the results on the main screen. But we're still seeing false positives in certain scenario types. And that's because the algorithm is learning from historical data that already contains bias, Olivia explained, making another adjustment. We need to incorporate the corrections module I designed last week. She pulled up a separate code window, explaining as she worked. Traditional machine learning systems perpetuate existing biases because they're trained on historical decisions that were themselves biased. Dignity Guard needs to identify these historical patterns and apply corrective weights. Amanda nodded appreciatively. Like teaching the system to recognize not just patterns, but problematic patterns. Exactly, Olivia confirmed. The goal isn't just accurate prediction, but ethical prediction. The door opened, and Marcus Reynolds entered with Thomas Bradford, Sky Global's CEO. Bradford paused, visibly affected by the sight of Olivia, the teenager his company had handcuffed until she bled, now leading the innovation that might save his airline. "Olivia," Marcus called. "Mr. Bradford is here for the progress update." Olivia turned, maintaining professional composure despite the complex emotions Bradford's presence evoked. "We're ready to demonstrate the core modules," she stated, her voice steady. Bradford approached cautiously, aware of the delicate dynamics. "Ms. Reynolds, I want to thank you again for your willingness to work with us despite what happened. Your contribution is extraordinary." "This isn't about forgiveness, Miss Bradford," Olivia replied candidly. "It's about transformation. My personal feelings are secondary to creating a system that prevents others from experiencing what I did." Her clarity seemed to both relieve and chastise Bradford. "Of course, please, show me what you've developed." Olivia turned to the main screen, now displaying a dashboard with multiple data streams. "Dignity Guard operates on 3 concurrent levels," she explained. "System-level pattern detection, real-time intervention protocols, and outcome accountability metrics." She pulled up the first module. "At the system level, we analyze aggregate data to identify problematic patterns, which employees have disproportionate incident rates with minorities, which routes show unusual discrepancies in passenger treatment, which algorithms produce biased outcomes." The screen displayed anonymized data from Sky Global's own records, revealing stark disparities in how different passenger demographics were treated. "This is quite concerning," Bradford acknowledged, studying the patterns. "It should be," Olivia stated matter-of-factly. "But identifying the problem is just the first step. The second module provides real-time intervention." She switched to a simulation showing a potential bias incident unfolding. Here, the system detects early indicators of a possible bias situation: a first-class passenger being repeatedly asked to verify their boarding pass, unusual scrutiny of identification, escalation without proper investigation. The simulation showed an alert being sent to supervisory staff, along with suggested de-escalation protocols. "The key is early intervention," Olivia explained. "By the time handcuffs come out, it's already too late. Dignity Guard identifies concerning patterns in the initial interactions and provides alternative response pathways." Bradford nodded thoughtfully. "And supervisors would receive these alerts how? Through existing communication systems, tablets, earpieces, phone notifications. The implementation can be customized to your operational structure." Professor Sinclair added, "The brilliance of Olivia's design is that it works within existing infrastructure. You don't need to replace your entire system. Just add this analytical layer." "The third module is perhaps most important," Olivia continued, switching to a new screen. "Accountability metrics that track outcomes over time, measuring both improvement and areas of continued concern." The dashboard displayed key performance indicators for equitable treatment, incident rates by demographic group, satisfaction scores, complaint patterns, and intervention effectiveness. "These metrics would be publicly available?" Bradford asked, looking slightly alarmed. "Transparency is essential," Olivia confirmed. "Public accountability creates both internal motivation for improvement and external validation of progress," Marcus interjected. "Think of it as ESG reporting for passenger dignity. Just as investors now expect environmental and governance metrics, they'll soon demand equity metrics as well." Bradford absorbed this, clearly processing the implications. "How soon could we begin implementation?" "The core algorithms are ready for initial testing," Olivia replied. "With Sky Global's cooperation in data access and operational integration, we could have the first phase implemented within 8 weeks, and the full system 6 months for comprehensive deployment across all operations," Olivia estimated. "But you'd see measurable improvements much sooner." Bradford turned to Marcus. "The board is prepared to proceed as discussed. Full commitment to implementation, independent auditing, and public accountability." "In Olivia's role," Marcus inquired. "As agreed, lead consultant with complete autonomy and appropriate compensation." Bradford turned back to Olivia. "Your perspective is invaluable, not just for the technical solution, but for ensuring we address the human aspects correctly." Olivia nodded, appreciating the acknowledgement of her dual contribution. technical expertise, and lived experience. There's one more thing, Bradford added, his expression serious. We'd like you to meet with Madison Parker. Olivia stiffened visibly. The flight attendant who initiated my removal. Yes, Bradford confirmed. She's been through extensive bias training and has expressed a desire to apologize directly. But more importantly, her perspective as someone who operated within our flawed system could provide insights for Dignity Guard's training modules. Olivia considered this carefully. Not for her absolution, but for the system's improvement, she finally stated. I'll meet with her at the MIT office next week. As Bradford left to report back to his board, Professor Sinclair turned to Olivia with undisguised admiration. Most people would use this situation for personal leverage or compensation. You're using it to create systemic change. The best revenge isn't punishment, Olivia replied thoughtfully. It's transformation. The following week, Madison Parker entered the MIT engineering lab with visible apprehension. Gone was the crisp airline uniform and confident demeanor. Instead, she wore business casual attire and carried herself with the humility of someone confronting difficult truths. Olivia sat at the conference table, her father beside her for support. The scars on her wrists were still visible, a physical reminder of the consequences of Madison's actions. Ms. Reynolds, Madison began, her voice unsteady. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Olivia nodded but didn't offer pleasantries. Mr. Bradford said you might have insights valuable for the Dignity Guard training modules. Madison took a seat across from them, clearly uncomfortable but determined. Before that, I need to apologize directly. My actions that day were inexcusable. I made assumptions based on how you looked rather than who you are. I escalated a situation that could have been resolved simply, and I caused you physical harm that will leave lasting scars. She paused, gathering courage to continue. The hardest part of my bias training was watching the recordings of my own behavior and recognizing patterns I'd denied for years. I didn't think of myself as prejudiced, but my actions tell a different story. Why did you immediately believe I had stolen another passenger's laptop? Olivia asked directly, even after he found his actual laptop. Madison flinched at the directness, but answered honestly. Because it fit a narrative I had internalized without questioning, that certain people don't belong in certain spaces unless they've taken something that isn't theirs. When you were in first class, my immediate assumption wasn't that you'd earned your place there, but that you'd somehow gamed the system. Her candor was unexpected, but valuable. That's exactly the kind of bias pattern Dignity Guard needs to identify and address, Olivia noted, making notes on her tablet. The training module should include real examples, Madison suggested tentatively. Not just abstract concepts, but actual incidents that forced people to confront their implicit assumptions. Seeing myself on video was painful but necessary. For the next hour, Madison provided insights into the operational culture that had enabled her behavior, from unofficial watch list criteria that had targeted minorities to performance metrics that rewarded security vigilance without questioning its application. As the meeting concluded, Madison asked hesitantly, will the system you're designing help prevent people like me from making the same mistakes? If it's implemented properly? Olivia confirmed. But technology is just an enabler. Real change requires human commitment to questioning assumptions and valuing dignity. Madison nodded, understanding the implicit challenge. As she left, Marcus turned to his daughter with pride. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, Olivia acknowledged, but her perspective is valuable for the training modules. Understanding how bias operates in real-world decision-making helps us design better intervention protocols. The meeting with Madison provided critical insights for Dignity Guard's development. Over the following weeks, Olivia incorporated these perspectives into the training modules, creating scenarios based on real incidents that forced users to confront their own potential biases. MIT officially announced a research partnership with Reynolds Holdings and Sky Global Airlines to develop the Dignity Guard system, with Olivia as the lead student researcher. The announcement generated significant media attention, transforming the narrative from scandal to innovation, from a teenager humiliated by an airline to a brilliant young engineer creating solutions to systematic problems. As Dignity Guard evolved from concept to implementation, Olivia's dual role as both victim and innovator gave the project unique credibility. Her technical brilliance earned respect from engineers. Her personal experience provided moral authority that corporate initiatives often lacked. The system she was creating wouldn't just address algorithmic bias, it would transform how dignity was protected throughout the passenger experience. And global. Once the perpetrator of her humiliation was becoming the laboratory for aviation's ethical evolution. Madison's journey. The bias training classroom fell silent as Madison Parker's face appeared on the screen. Not in person, but in the viral video that had now been viewed over 20 million times, Madison following behind as officers dragged a bleeding Olivia through Newark Airport, her expression a disturbing mixture of satisfaction and contempt. "This is how the world saw me that day," Madison stated from the podium, her voice steady despite the emotional weight. "And the hardest part of my journey has been accepting that it wasn't a misrepresentation. It was me, the real me that I had refused to acknowledge." 20 Sky Global employees, pilots, flight attendants, gate agents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was day one of the newly mandatory equitable treatment training, and none had expected such raw honesty from their instructor. 8 weeks had passed since the incident that transformed Madison from senior flight attendant to the most recognized face of aviation discrimination. Her initial suspension had been followed by termination, then a surprising offer return, not to flight duties, but as part of the Dignity Guard implementation team, using her painful experience to help others recognize and address their own biases. "I was raised in a small town in upstate New York," Madison continued, advancing to the next slide, a family photo from her childhood. "My parents were good people who taught me to treat everyone equally. At least that's what they said, but their actions often told a different story." She clicked to footage from her own body language analysis session, a painful exercise where behavioral experts had identified subtle but significant differences in how she interacted with passengers of different races. "I made immediate assumptions about Olivia Reynolds based solely on how she looked," Madison acknowledged. "When she sat in first class, I didn't see a brilliant young woman traveling to a scholarship interview. I saw someone who didn't belong in a space I considered reserved for certain types of people." An older flight attendant raised his hand. "But we're trained to be vigilant about unusual situations. First class has certain demographics." "That's exactly the thinking that led to my catastrophic failure," Madison replied without defensiveness. "I confused demographics with deservingness. I equated belonging with appearance rather than boarding pass." She advanced to the next slide, the core principles of the Dignity Guard approach. "The system being implemented will help identify potential bias incidents before they escalate," she explained. "But technology alone can't transform culture. That requires individual commitment to questioning our assumptions and recognizing our blind spots." As the training session continued, Madison guided the group through scenarios based on actual incidents, challenging them to identify the moments where implicit bias influenced decision-making. The exercises were uncomfortable but revelatory, forcing participants to confront patterns in their own behavior that they had never previously acknowledged. During the lunch break, Madison sat alone, reviewing her notes for the afternoon session. Elena Rodriguez, Sky Global's HR director who had first confronted Madison with her pattern of biased interactions, joined her. "You're doing important work," Elena observed. "How are you holding up?" Madison sighed, closing her tablet. "It's exhausting, necessary, but exhausting. Every day I relive my worst moment while trying to help others avoid making similar mistakes." "Have you spoken with Olivia recently?" Elena asked. "We meet weekly to review the training materials." Madison confirmed. "It's still uncomfortable. I don't expect or deserve her forgiveness, but her willingness to work with me despite what I did, it's humbling." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "Transformation is rarely comfortable, but your willingness to use your experience as a teaching tool gives these training sessions authenticity that corporate programs usually lack." After lunch, Madison led the group through the Dignity Guard intervention protocols, the specific actions staff should take when the system flagged potential bias situations. These weren't just abstract guidelines, but specific responses to real-world scenarios. "When the system alerts you to a potential bias situation," Madison explained, "it's not accusing you of prejudice. It's providing an opportunity to reassess the interaction before it escalates unnecessarily." A young gate agent raised her hand. "But what if the alert is wrong? What if there really is a security concern?" "That's why the protocols include verification steps," Madison clarified. Dignity Guard doesn't replace human judgment. It enhances it by prompting conscious consideration rather than automatic responses. She advanced to a case study, the laptop misunderstanding that had initiated Olivia's ordeal. Consider how this situation could have been handled differently. When the passenger found his actual laptop, that should have been the end of the matter. Instead, I persisted in treating Olivia as suspicious because it fit my preconceived narrative. Madison pulled up the alternative response protocol. Dignity Guard would have flagged my continued escalation after the misunderstanding was clarified, prompting supervisor intervention before security became involved. As the training session concluded, Madison distributed evaluation forms, encouraging honest feedback. This program will continue to evolve based on your experiences implementing it. The goal isn't perfect people, but a system that helps imperfect people make more equitable decisions. Later that evening, Madison met with Olivia and Professor Sinclair at MIT to review the day's training outcomes. The dynamic between them remained complex. Professional collaboration built atop a foundation of profound harm and cautious reconciliation. The participant feedback was surprisingly positive. Madison reported sharing the evaluation results. Several identified specific incidents where they recognized their own biased responses in retrospect. Olivia nodded, studying the data. That self-recognition is crucial. Dignity Guard can identify patterns, but lasting change requires personal acknowledgement of the problem. Professor Sinclair added, the training videos are particularly effective. Seeing real incidents rather than hypothetical scenarios makes the impact tangible. Madison hesitated before speaking again. I've been thinking about expanding my role in this project. My perspective as someone who operated within the bias system and then had to confront my own prejudices might be valuable beyond Sky Global. What are you proposing? Olivia asked, her expression neutral. A more public role in advocating for these reforms. Madison explained, sharing my experience, not to center myself in the narrative, but to demonstrate that transformation is possible even for those who initially resist it. Olivia considered this carefully. Your story could reach people who might dismiss me as simply a victim seeking redress, but it would need to be handled carefully, always keeping the focus on systematic change rather than personal redemption. I understand, Madison affirmed. This isn't about rehabilitating my image. It's about using my experience to advance the larger mission. The conversation marked an important evolution in their working relationship, not friendship or forgiveness, but purposeful collaboration toward a shared goal. Madison's journey from perpetrator to advocate represented an essential component of the broader transformation, demonstrating that systems could change because people could change. Over the following months, Madison became an unexpected but effective voice in the movement for equitable treatment in transportation. Her willingness to acknowledge her failures publicly and work toward redemption through meaningful action resonated with industry professionals who might otherwise have dismissed bias concerns as external criticism. In a surprising development, Ramon Diaz, the security officer who had applied the too-tight handcuffs, joined Madison in these efforts, bringing his perspective from law enforcement. Their joint presentations to airport security teams across the country provided powerful testimonials about how implicit bias could lead well-intentioned professionals to cause harm. Madison would never erase what she had done to Olivia Reynolds. The scars on Olivia's wrists would remain, visible reminders of that day in Newark Airport. But through her commitment to preventing similar incidents, Madison was creating meaning from her failure, transforming a moment of profound shame into a catalyst for systematic improvement. The woman who had once viewed Olivia through a lens of prejudice was now helping others recognize and address their own biases. It wasn't redemption in the traditional sense, but something perhaps more valuable, practical amends through tangible change. Systemic implementation. The initial results exceed our expectations. Thomas Bradford announced to the Sky Global Board, displaying the first quarterly metrics since Dignity Guard's preliminary implementation. Passenger complaint rates related to discriminatory treatment have decreased 76% across our test locations. Victoria Hernandez, the board chair, studied the data with cautious optimism and operational efficiency. That's the most surprising outcome, Bradford replied, advancing to the next slide. The average security resolution time has decreased 23%. When bias is removed from the equation, decisions become both more equitable and more efficient. 3 months had passed since the first phase of Dignity Guard's implementation across 3 major Sky Global hubs. What had begun as a crisis response had evolved into a systematic transformation of how the airline approached passenger interactions. The Reynolds acquisition is back on track, Bradford continued. Due diligence is proceeding, with closing anticipated next quarter. Our stock has recovered 87% of its post-incident losses, and customer satisfaction metrics are trending positive across all demographics. The boardroom atmosphere had transformed dramatically from the tense emergency sessions following Olivia's incident. What had initially seemed like an existential threat to the company was becoming a potential competitive advantage. What about implementation challenges? Asked the chief operating officer. We're still hearing resistance from some station managers. That's why the phased approach is critical, Bradford acknowledged. The success metrics from Newark, Chicago, and Atlanta provide compelling evidence for the remaining locations. It's difficult to argue with results. At Newark Airport, and where Olivia's ordeal had begun, the transformation was most visible. The security office where she had been detained with bleeding wrists had been converted into a passenger advocacy center, staffed by trained professionals focused on resolving conflicts equitably. Ramon Diaz, once facing termination for his role in Olivia's injuries, had been reassigned as a Dignity Guard implementation specialist, using his security expertise to help redesign response protocols. His willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and commit to reform had earned him an unexpected second chance. The core insight of Dignity Guard isn't just algorithmic, Ramon explained to a group of security officers during their training session. It's recognizing that security and dignity aren't opposing values. They're complementary. When passengers feel respected, security interactions become more cooperative and effective. The training included reviewing footage from actual incidents, including Olivia's, with officers identifying intervention points where different approaches could have prevented escalation. These weren't abstract scenarios, but real situations they might encounter, with specific protocols for de-escalation and resolution. In Chicago O'Hare, gate agents were learning the revised passenger verification procedures designed to eliminate disparities in how identification was checked across different demographics. The system isn't accusing you of being prejudiced, the trainer emphasized. It's acknowledging that we all have implicit biases that can affect our decisions without conscious awareness. Dignity Guard helps us recognize these patterns before they lead to discriminatory outcomes. The technology component, featuring Olivia's algorithm for detecting potential bias situations in real time, had been integrated with existing systems, providing alerts to supervisors when interactions showed warning signs of problematic escalation. When a first-class passenger was questioned about their seating assignment multiple times despite having valid documentation, the system flagged the pattern. When a passenger's identification was scrutinized beyond standard procedures, an alert was generated. When security was called for a situation that could be resolved through standard customer service protocols, intervention was triggered. At MIT, Olivia continued refining the algorithms based on implementation data, working closely with Professor Sinclair and a team of graduate students. The project had expanded beyond its original scope, attracting attention from other transportation sectors interested in adapting their approach to their operations. The Department of Transportation has expressed interest in establishing industry-wide standards based on Dignity Guard's metrics, Professor Sinclair informed Olivia during their weekly review session. Your work is creating ripples far beyond Sky Global. Olivia nodded, studying the implementation data. The technical challenge was relatively straightforward. The cultural transformation is where real resistance emerges. That's why the phased approach is so effective, Professor Sinclair observed. Success in initial locations creates momentum for broader adoption. The data supported this strategy. At the 3 test airports, not only had bias complaints decreased dramatically, but overall customer satisfaction scores had improved across all demographic groups. Even passengers who never experienced discrimination directly appreciated the more respectful, consistent treatment fostered by the new protocols. Sky Global's competitors had taken notice. United, American, and Delta had all announced plans to review their own passenger screening procedures. Industry publications were featuring stories about the Dignity Guard revolution, transforming aviation customer service. Marcus Reynolds monitored these developments with quiet satisfaction. What had begun as a response to his daughter's traumatic experience was evolving into an industry-wide movement for equitable treatment. Sky Global, once the cautionary example was becoming the model for systematic reform. The acquisition closing is scheduled for next month, he informed Olivia during dinner at their home. Once Reynolds Holdings has a controlling interest, we can accelerate implementation across their entire network. Olivia nodded, absently touching the fading scars on her wrists, a habit she had developed when discussing Dignity Guard's progress. The algorithm is detecting 83% of potential bias incidents in testing, with a false positive rate under 7%. That's significantly better than our initial projections. It's not just the technology that's impressive, Marcus observed. It's the cultural shift you've catalyzed. Bradford tells me that employees who were initially resistant are now becoming advocates after seeing the results. The most powerful evidence came from passengers themselves. Testimonials were flowing in from travelers who had experienced the difference in how they were treated under the new system. Particularly moving were stories from minority passengers who had previously accepted discriminatory treatment as an unavoidable aspect of air travel, now experiencing the dignity that should have been their right all along. A Black executive wrote, "For the first time in my 20 years of business travel, I boarded a plane without being asked to verify my first-class ticket multiple times. It sounds small, but it felt revolutionary." A Muslim family shared the security screening was thorough but respectful. No extra random checks, no suspicious glances, just professional treatment like any other passengers. Our children noticed the difference immediately. At the next Sky Global board meeting, Bradford presented the 6-month implementation plan for the remaining airports in their network. The phased approach would continue, with each successful location creating momentum for the next wave of adoption. "We're no longer implementing Dignity Guard because we have to," Bradford concluded. "We're accelerating implementation because it works, not just ethically but operationally and financially." Victoria Hernandez nodded in agreement. What began as crisis management has become competitive advantage. The metrics speak for themselves. The transformation wasn't without challenges. Some longtime employees resisted the new protocols, viewing them as unnecessary constraints on their judgment. Some executives worried about the costs of full implementation. Some passengers complained about changes to procedures they had grown accustomed to, even if those procedures had been inherently inequitable. But the data consistently demonstrated that Dignity Guard was creating a more efficient, more equitable, and ultimately more profitable operation. Passenger satisfaction scores were rising, complaint resolution costs were falling. Employee engagement metrics were improving as staff experienced less conflict in their daily interactions. What had begun with Olivia's bleeding wrists had evolved into a systematic reimagining of how dignity could be protected through thoughtful application of both technology and cultural change. The scars of that day would never completely fade, not from Olivia's skin and not from Sky Global's history, but they had become catalysts for transformation rather than simply painful reminders of injustice. As implementation continued expanding across the aviation network, the question shifted from whether such change was possible to why it had taken so long to recognize its necessity. The Dignity Guard approach was demonstrating that equity wasn't just morally right, but operationally beneficial, that treating all passengers with dignity created better outcomes for everyone involved. The system Olivia had conceptualized while still recovering from her injuries was becoming the new standard for an entire industry. And Sky Global, once responsible for her humiliation, was becoming the unexpected leader in aviation's ethical evolution. Broader impact, Dignity Guard principles extend far beyond aviation. Olivia explained to the assembled transportation leaders at the National Transit Conference. At 19, speaking with authority to executives twice her age, she commanded the room through the power of her ideas rather than positional authority. 6 months into Sky Global's transformation, the ripple effects were spreading across transportation sectors. Representatives from railways, public transit systems, cruise lines, and rideshare platforms had gathered to learn how the approach could be adapted to their specific context. Transportation is fundamentally about human movement with dignity, Olivia continued, advancing to her core slides. Whether by air, rail, sea, or road, the central questions remain the same. Are all passengers treated with equal respect regardless of appearance? Are services accessible to everyone regardless of perceived status? Do systems protect dignity by default rather than by exception? The data visualizations behind her told a compelling story. Sky Global's dramatic improvements in both passenger experience metrics and operational efficiency, with bias incidents down 78.3% and customer satisfaction up 32.7% across all demographic groups. The technology can be adapted to different operational contexts, Olivia explained, but the core principles remain consistent: systematic monitoring for potential bias, early intervention before incidents escalate, and accountability metrics to drive continuous improvement. Representatives from Amtrak leaned forward with particular interest as Olivia outlined how the principles could be applied to rail operations. Public transit officials from major metropolitan areas took extensive notes on the urban applications. Cruise line executives studied the customer service metrics with evident intrigue. What makes Dignity Guard different from standard diversity initiatives? Asked the operations director from a major urban transit authority. Results? Olivia replied simply. Most diversity programs focus on awareness and intention. Dignity Guard focuses on measurable outcomes. It's not about feeling better, it's about doing better in quantifiable ways. Marcus Reynolds, observing from the side of the stage, felt profound pride watching his daughter translate her traumatic experience into systematic solutions that could benefit millions of travelers. The scars on her wrists had faded to silver lines, but their impact continued expanding far beyond that painful day in Newark. Following her presentation, a Department of Transportation official approached Olivia. "We're developing new federal standards for equitable treatment in transportation," she explained. "Your metrics could form the foundation for those guidelines. Would you consider consulting with our policy team?" The Dignity Guard approach was expanding beyond individual corporate adoption to potential regulatory frameworks. What had begun as a response to a specific incident was evolving into an industry-wide transformation, supported by both market forces and policy mechanisms. At MIT, Professor Sinclair had established the Transportation Equity Lab with Olivia as lead student researcher. The academic home for this work ensured ongoing innovation beyond commercial implementation, maintaining focus on the fundamental principles rather than merely market applications. The cross-modal applications are particularly promising, Professor Sinclair noted during their weekly review. Each transportation mode has unique operational constraints, but the core principles of dignity protection translate remarkably well. Amtrak had become the first rail carrier to implement a modified version of Dignity Guard, focusing initially on their Northeast Corridor operations. Early results showed a 68% reduction in bias complaints alongside a 21% improvement in conflict resolution metrics. The conductor-passenger interaction is different from flight attendant-passenger dynamics, Olivia explained to the implementation team, but the potential bias points remain similar. Ticketing verification, seating disputes, service recovery. The system just needs recalibration for these specific contexts. Urban transit systems presented different challenges, operating in environments with higher passenger volume and shorter interaction times. The Chicago Transit Authority had pioneered adaptation for urban systems, developing streamlined protocols suitable for their operational constraints. We've focused on key decision points where bias most frequently affects passenger experience, explained CTA's implementation director. Security interactions, fare enforcement, and service recovery represent the highest risk areas for dignity violations. By redesigning these specific processes, we've achieved significant improvements without disrupting overall operations. Cruise lines were adapting the approach for their unique environment, where passengers and crew interact over extended periods in confined spaces. Royal Caribbean's Director of Passenger Experience shared their preliminary findings. The extended nature of cruise voyages creates different bias risks. Dignity Guard principles help us address these through both technological monitoring and crew training focused on consistent treatment across passenger demographics. The impact extended beyond passenger experience to employee engagement. Transportation workers reported higher job satisfaction when operating under the new protocols, finding their interactions less conflictual and more rewarding across all passenger demographics. "I used to dread certain passenger interactions," admitted a veteran Sky Global flight attendant during a focus group. Not because of explicit prejudice, but because of unconscious assumptions that created tension I couldn't quite identify. The new protocols have transformed those interactions completely. Academic interest expanded alongside industry adoption. Major universities had established research initiatives focused on transportation equity, examining both technological solutions and policy frameworks. Harvard Business School was developing a case study on Sky Global's transformation, analyzing how crisis response had evolved into competitive advantage through ethical innovation. Media coverage shifted from scandal reporting to innovation profiles. Major publications featured Olivia as an emerging leader in technology ethics, highlighting her unique combination of technical brilliance and moral purpose. Business journals analyzed the financial implications of Dignity Guard implementation, noting that Sky Global's stock had not only recovered, but surpassed pre-incident levels as the company gained reputation as an industry leader in passenger experience. Civil rights organizations that had initially called for boycotts of Sky Global now cited the airline as a model for institutional reform. "This is what meaningful change looks like," noted the president of the National Civil Liberties Coalition during a television interview. Not just public apologies and sensitivity training, but fundamental redesign of systems that had enabled discriminatory treatment. Government interest continued growing. The Federal Aviation Administration was developing certification standards based on Dignity Guard's equity metrics. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division was studying the implementation as a potential model for consent decrees in other industries. Congressional committees were considering legislation that would require similar protections across federally regulated transportation systems. For Marcus Reynolds, the broader impact confirmed what he had recognized from the beginning, that his daughter's ordeal could become a catalyst for systematic change if approached with strategic purpose rather than merely personal grievance. "The acquisition closes next week," he informed Olivia during their weekly strategy dinner. "Once Reynolds Holdings has controlling interest in Sky Global, we can accelerate implementation across their entire network and begin licensing the technology to other carriers." Olivia nodded, reviewing the latest implementation data on her tablet. "The algorithm detection accuracy has reached 87% in real-world conditions, with false positives down to 5.8%. But I'm more encouraged by the cultural metrics. Employee engagement scores are up significantly at the implementation sites. That's the real transformation," Marcus agreed. "Technology enables the change, but culture sustains it." The impact extended to individual lives in ways both measurable and profound. Minority passengers reported dramatically improved experiences across Sky Global's network. Transportation workers described more positive interactions when freed from systemically biased protocols. Security staff found their work more effective when focusing on actual risk indicators rather than demographic proxies. Perhaps most significantly, the conversation about dignity in transportation had fundamentally shifted. What had once been dismissed as isolated incidents or individual complaints was now recognized as a systematic issue requiring systematic solutions. And those solutions were working, creating measurable improvements in both equitable treatment and operational efficiency. As the Dignity Guard approach expanded beyond aviation, its core principles were adapted to the various contexts while maintaining the essential focus on protecting human dignity through thoughtful system design. The transportation equity movement that had begun with Olivia's bleeding wrists was becoming a model for how institutions could transform in response to demonstrated failures, not through defensive reactions, but through genuine commitment to improvement. The scars on Olivia's wrists had faded to faint silver lines, visible reminders of both trauma endured and purpose discovered. What had happened to her could never be undone, but its meaning had been transformed through her determination to create something better from her painful experience. As she told a student group during a campus presentation, dignity isn't just the absence of humiliation, it's the presence of respect. And respect isn't just an attitude, it's a practice that can be systematically supported through thoughtful design of both technology and human systems. That insight that dignity could be protected through intentional design rather than merely individual goodwill was perhaps the most profound impact of all. The bleeding teenager in handcuffs had catalyzed not just a corporate crisis, but an evolving movement for transportation equity that continued expanding its reach and influence. Personal healing. The therapist's office was quiet except for the gentle hum of air conditioning. Sarah Bennett watched as Olivia absently traced the fading scars on her wrists, a habit she had developed when processing difficult emotions. "The nightmares are less frequent now," Olivia acknowledged. "Maybe once a week instead of almost every night." "That's significant progress," Dr. Bennett noted. "What do you think has contributed to that improvement?" Olivia considered the question thoughtfully. "Partly time, partly the work with Dignity Guard, transforming what happened into something constructive, and partly just talking about it here, processing it properly instead of just pushing forward. 8 months had passed since the handcuffing incident. While Olivia had immediately channeled her energy into developing Dignity Guard, Marcus had gently insisted that technological solutions couldn't replace psychological healing. The weekly therapy sessions had become an essential counterbalance to her intense work schedule, a space where she could acknowledge the trauma without being defined by it. "You've accomplished remarkable things externally," Todd Bennett observed. "But internal healing follows its own timeline. How are you feeling about the upcoming anniversary?" Olivia's expression tightened slightly. "I've been thinking about it more than I'd like to admit. Part of me wants to treat it as just another day. Another part feels like I should mark it somehow, acknowledge both what happened and what's come from it." "Both approaches are valid," Dr. Bennett assured her. "There's no single right way to process trauma or commemorate its milestones." Later that evening, Olivia sat in the home office she shared with her father, reviewing implementation data from the latest Dignity Guard deployment. Marcus entered with 2 cups of tea, placing one beside her. "You've been quiet today," he observed, taking the chair opposite her desk. "Anniversary thoughts?" Olivia nodded, setting aside her tablet. "I keep thinking about who I might have been if it hadn't happened, if I'd made that original MIT interview, focused solely on aerospace engineering, never developed Dignity Guard. You'd still be brilliant," Marcus said with certainty. "Still innovative, still compassionate. The circumstances might have been different, but those core qualities were always there. But would I have found this particular purpose?" Olivia wondered. "There's something powerful about work born from personal experience, something authentic that might not have emerged otherwise." Marcus considered this thoughtfully. "Your mother used to say that we don't choose our challenges, but we do choose what we build from them. She would be incredibly proud of what you've built." The mention of Elaine Reynolds brought a slight smile to Olivia's face. She reached for the framed photograph on her desk, her mother in pilot's uniform, standing proudly beside a commercial aircraft. She faced her own battles with discrimination in aviation. Different era, same fundamental issues. She would have been your first advocate and your strongest supporter, Marcus affirmed. But she also would have insisted, as I do, that you balance purpose with personal well-being. Olivia's academic advisor at MIT had expressed similar concerns, noting her tendency to immerse herself completely in Dignity Guard work at the expense of other aspects of college life. While her technical brilliance had never wavered, there was concern about the emotional weight she carried as both trauma survivor and system reformer. "Professor Sinclair suggested I consider stepping back from some of the public appearances," Olivia admitted. "She thinks I'm becoming too much the face of the movement rather than just one of its architects." "Wise advice," Marcus agreed. "This work is important, but it shouldn't consume your entire identity, especially at 19. The following week, Olivia took a significant step in her personal healing journey, meeting with Ramon Diaz not as implementation partners, but specifically to address the physical injuries he had caused. The scars on her wrists were constant reminders of his actions that day in Newark Airport. They met in a neutral setting, a quiet cafe near the MIT campus. Ramon's demeanor was subdued, the confidence of his former security role replaced by the humility of someone facing the consequences of his actions. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he began. "I know our professional collaboration has been productive, but we've never really addressed the direct harm I caused you." Olivia nodded, unconsciously touching her wrist scars. "The doctor says they'll fade more over time, but they'll never completely disappear." Ramon winced visibly at this reminder. "I've replayed that moment countless times, applying those handcuffs so tightly, ignoring your requests for adjustment, dismissing the evident pain. I had multiple opportunities to make different choices, and I failed at each one." "Why did you make those choices?" Olivia asked, the question she had wanted to ask for months. Ramon didn't hesitate. "Because I saw you through a biased lens that made me perceive compliance as resistance, dignity as defiance. I assumed that a young black woman in first class who'd been accused of theft must be dangerous enough to require restraint, despite all evidence to the contrary." His candor was both painful and healing, acknowledgement of the reality without excuses or minimization. "I don't expect forgiveness," Ramon continued. But I want you to know that transforming security protocols has become my life's work. Your injury has become my education, and preventing similar harm has become my purpose." Olivia considered his words carefully. "I appreciate your honesty. I don't know if forgiveness is the right framework here. It suggests an interpersonal grievance rather than a systematic failure. What matters more is the transformation you're helping create. That's how meaning comes from injury." Their conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, addressing both the specific incident and the broader systems that had enabled it. Though not exactly closure in the traditional sense, the meeting provided important context for Olivia's ongoing healing process, connecting her personal trauma to the systematic changes now unfolding. As the anniversary of the incident approached, Marcus suggested a meaningful way to acknowledge it. "What if we established a scholarship in your mother's name, the Olivia Reynolds Aviation Equity Scholarship, for minority students pursuing careers in transportation?" The idea resonated deeply with Olivia. Connecting her legacy to this work feels right. She faced so many of these same battles, just in a different era. They announced the scholarship on the exact 1-year anniversary of the handcuffing incident. Rather than dwelling on the trauma, they focused on the transformation it had catalyzed, both personally and systematically. The initial funding would support 5 students annually, with preference given to candidates committed to advancing equity in transportation systems. The announcement received significant media coverage, with most outlets noting the powerful symmetry 1 year after being prevented from attending her own scholarship interview. Olivia was creating opportunities for others who might face similar barriers. In her statement, Olivia acknowledged both the pain and purpose of her journey. What happened a year ago left physical scars that will never completely fade, but it also revealed the urgent need for systematic change in how we protect dignity in transportation. "This scholarship honors my mother's pioneering work while supporting the next generation of innovative thinkers committed to creating more equitable systems." The scholarship announcement marked an important psychological milestone, transforming the anniversary from a potentially triggering reminder of trauma into a constructive commemoration of progress. It represented Olivia's growing ability to integrate the incident into her life narrative without being defined by it. In therapy, Dr. Bennett noted the significance of this evolution. "You're creating meaning from the experience without minimizing its impact. That's an important balance in the trauma recovery." Olivia's personal healing continued alongside her professional work, each informing and strengthening the other. The nightmares became less frequent, the instinctive tensing when seeing security officers less pronounced, the habit of touching her wrist scars less compulsive. She began allowing herself more balanced college experiences, joining the robotics club, attending social events, developing friendships unrelated to her work on Dignity Guard. While her commitment to transportation equity remained unwavering, it became one aspect of her identity rather than its defining feature. Marcus observed these changes with quiet relief. He had worried that the traumatic incident might permanently overshadow his daughter's brilliance, constraining her to a single narrative. Instead, she was integrating the experience into a more complex self-understanding, neither defined solely by trauma nor attempting to erase its reality. On a crisp autumn morning, Olivia boarded a Sky Global flight to attend a conference, her first time flying the airline since the incident. Though Reynolds Holdings now owned a controlling interest in the company, she had chosen to fly as a regular passenger, experiencing the transformed systems from a customer perspective. The check-in process was efficient and respectful, the security screening thorough but dignified, the boarding procedure consistent across all passengers regardless of appearance. Small changes individually, but collectively they created an entirely different experience, one that protected dignity as a fundamental right rather than a conditional privilege. As Olivia settled into her seat, she realized she was breathing normally, her heart rate steady. The anxious hypervigilance that had accompanied her previous airport experiences had diminished significantly. Not gone entirely. Trauma's imprints rarely disappear completely, but manageable in ways it hadn't been before. She glanced at her wrist scars, now faded to silvery lines against her dark skin. They would always remain, physical reminders of that day in Newark Airport. But their meaning had evolved from merely markers of injury to symbols of transformation, evidence of both wounds endured and healing achieved, both personally and systematically. The flight attendant approached with a pre-departure beverage. "Welcome aboard, Miss Reynolds," she said warmly. "Can I get you anything before takeoff?" "Just water, thank you," Olivia replied, noting the Dignity Guard emblem discreetly displayed on the attendant's uniform, evidence of the system now operating throughout the flight. As the aircraft taxied for takeoff, Olivia reflected on the journey of the past year, from bleeding teenager in handcuffs to engineering student creating systematic change. The trauma would always be part of her story, but it wasn't the whole story. And that, perhaps, was the most important aspect of healing, reclaiming narrative breadth beyond the defining moment of injury. The plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the sky, carrying Olivia toward new opportunities and challenges. The scars on her wrists caught the sunlight streaming through the window. No longer wounds, but witnesses to both pain endured and purpose discovered. Part 4, the resolution. 1 year later, industry transformation. The metrics speak for themselves, Thomas Bradford declared, indicating the comprehensive data displayed on the main screen. Bias incidents down 78.3% across participating carriers. Customer satisfaction up 32.7% among minority passengers. Complaint resolution costs reduced by 37.1%. These aren't marginal improvements. They represent fundamental transformation. The Aviation Industry Summit had drawn executives from every major carrier worldwide. 1 year after Olivia Reynolds had been handcuffed until she bled at Newark Airport, the systematic changes catalyzed by that incident had expanded far beyond Sky Global Airlines. Bradford, once fighting for his professional survival amid the crisis, now stood as a respected industry leader in passenger experience innovation. What began as our company's darkest moment has become the foundation for industry-wide reform, he acknowledged. The Dignity Guard framework didn't just address our specific failures. It revealed systematic problems across commercial aviation. In the audience, Marcus Reynolds listened with measured satisfaction. As controlling shareholder of Sky Global through Reynolds Holdings, he had guided the airline's transformation from cautionary example to industry leader. The acquisition that had nearly collapsed following Olivia's mistreatment had instead become a case study in creating value through ethical innovation. The business case for equitable treatment has been definitively established. Bradford continued, when we remove bias from our systems, we improve both passenger experience and operational efficiency. This isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. The summit featured implementation teams from multiple airlines sharing their experiences, adapting the Dignity Guard approach to their specific operations. What had begun as Sky Global's crisis response had evolved into an industry standard, with 87% of domestic carriers and 64% of international airlines implementing some version of the system. Madison Parker, now directing Sky Global's Equitable Treatment Training Program, led a panel discussion with her counterparts from other airlines. The key insight from our implementation was that technology enables change, but culture sustains it, she emphasized. The algorithm flags potential bias incidents, but human commitment prevents them from occurring in the first place. Her evolution from discriminatory flight attendant to equity advocate remained one of the most compelling aspects of the Sky Global transformation story. Industry publications had featured profiles of her journey, highlighting the potential for individual growth within systematic reform. Ramon Diaz shared similar insights from the security perspective, detailing how revised protocols had improved both passenger experience and operational effectiveness. When we replaced demographic profiling with behavior-based assessment, we actually improved threat detection while reducing passenger complaints by 83%. The Federal Aviation Administration had established new standards for passenger treatment based on the Dignity Guard metrics, creating regulatory incentives for airlines to implement similar systems. The Department of Transportation had issued guidelines for equitable treatment across all federally regulated transportation modes. Explicitly citing the aviation industry's transformative approach as a model, international adoption was accelerating, with the International Air Transport Association establishing global benchmarks for dignity and passenger interactions. Airlines from Europe, Asia, and the Middle East had sent implementation teams to study the Sky Global model, adapting its principles to their specific cultural and operational contexts. The technological architecture is adaptable, Bradford explained, but the core principle remains consistent. Dignity isn't a luxury or a marketing feature. It's a fundamental right that transportation systems must protect systematically. In the MIT Engineering Lab, Olivia Reynolds worked with a team of graduate students on Dignity Guard 2. Euro incorporating insights from the first year of implementation to enhance both accuracy and adaptation capabilities. Now a sophomore studying aerospace engineering with a secondary concentration in ethics of technology, she had established herself as a uniquely insightful voice in transportation innovation. The pattern recognition capabilities have improved dramatically with the expanded data set, she explained to Professor Sinclair during their review session. We're now detecting 92% of potential bias incidents in testing, with false positives below 4%. And the adaptation protocols, Professor Sinclair inquired. That's the most exciting development, Olivia replied, pulling up a new dashboard. The system now customizes intervention recommendations based on airline-specific operations and cultural contexts. What works at a U.S. carrier might be ineffective at a Middle Eastern or Asian airline. The Transportation Equity Lab had expanded significantly, attracting substantial research funding and industry partnerships. What had begun as Olivia's personal project had evolved into a multidisciplinary research initiative exploring applications across various transportation modes. The technological success was impressive, but the cultural transformation was perhaps more significant. Throughout the transportation industry, equity was no longer framed as merely a compliance issue or public relations concern, but as a fundamental aspect of operational excellence. When we design systems that protect dignity by default, we create better experiences for everyone involved. Bradford emphasized in his keynote address, our employees report higher job satisfaction, our passengers report better experiences, our shareholders see stronger financial performance. Equity isn't a zero-sum proposition, it's a value-creating approach. The data supported his assertion. Sky Global's stock had not only recovered from the post-incident decline, but had outperformed the industry index by 17.3% over the past year. Passenger loyalty metrics showed significant improvement, particularly among demographic groups that had previously reported negative experiences. Employee retention had increased, reducing training costs and improving service consistency. For the executives gathered at the summit, these financial outcomes were perhaps the most compelling aspect of the transformation story. The Dignity Guard approach wasn't being presented as merely an ethical imperative, but as a strategic advantage in an increasingly competitive industry. The carriers that resist this transformation aren't just on the wrong side of history, Bradford concluded. They're on the wrong side of market forces. Passengers increasingly expect equitable treatment as a baseline condition, not an aspirational goal. As the summit concluded, industry analysts noted a significant shift in how transportation companies discussed equity initiatives. What had once been relegated to corporate social responsibility statements was now featured prominently in strategic plans and investor presentations. The business case for dignity had been established not through abstract arguments, but through measurable results. For Marcus Reynolds, observing this industry-wide transformation confirmed his initial insight, that his daughter's traumatic experience could become a catalyst for systematic change if approached strategically rather than merely as a personal grievance. The acquisition that almost didn't happen has become our most successful investment, he noted to his executive team during their quarterly review, not just financially, though the returns have been exceptional, but in terms of meaningful impact. The transformation continued accelerating as more carriers implemented Dignity Guard principles and technologies. The industry that had once considered demographic profiling an acceptable security practice was systematically redesigning its approach to passenger interactions, creating measurable improvements in both equity and efficiency. 1 year after bleeding in handcuffs, Olivia Reynolds could board any flight on any airline with reasonable confidence that she would be treated with the dignity that should have been her right all along. And millions of other passengers were experiencing similar improvements, not because of individual goodwill, but because of systematic changes designed to protect dignity by default. The teenager whose humiliation had gone viral had catalyzed not just a corporate crisis but an industry revolution. And that revolution continued expanding its reach, transforming how transportation systems approach the fundamental human right to move through the world with dignity intact. Personal triumphs. The MIT Aerospace Engineering Laboratory hummed with focused energy as students worked on their various projects. Olivia Reynolds adjusted a component on her advanced propulsion model, her hands steady and precise. At 20, she had already established herself as one of the department's most promising students. her academic excellence matching her growing reputation as a transportation equity innovator. Professor Amanda Sinclair approached, reviewing Olivia's design with evident appreciation. The thermal efficiency calculations are remarkable. You've solved the cooling problem that stumped last year's graduate team. I borrowed some concepts from biological systems, Olivia explained, highlighting specific elements of her design. Vascular cooling networks similar to capillary structures in living organisms. Her dual focus, pursuing cutting-edge aerospace engineering while continuing to develop Dignity Guard, had created a unique intersection of technical innovation and social impact. Rather than allowing the handcuffing incident to narrow her focus to a single mission, she had integrated equity considerations into her broader engineering vision. The Foundation Board approved your proposal, Professor Sinclair informed her. Full funding for the next phase of Dignity Guard implementation research. The Dignity Guard Foundation had been established with initial funding from Reynolds Holdings to support ongoing development and implementation of equitable treatment systems across transportation sectors. Now with multiple corporate and philanthropic partners, it had become the institutional home for Olivia's continuing work while allowing her to maintain focus on her academic pursuits. That's excellent news, Olivia replied, her expression brightening. The cruise line adaptation especially needs further development before full implementation. Later that evening, in her campus apartment, Olivia video called with her father. Marcus Reynolds' face appeared on screen, his expression warm with paternal pride. The propulsion system patent application was approved, he announced. Congratulations, Dr. Reynolds in waiting. Olivia laughed at the premature title. I'm still a sophomore. Dad, doctorate is years away. Just prediction, not presumption, Marcus replied with a smile. How are you feeling about the Elaine Reynolds scholarship announcement tomorrow? Olivia's expression softened at the mention of her mother's memorial scholarship. Excited to meet the recipients. They're all remarkable students with compelling stories. Mom would have been proud to support their journeys. And the scholarship, established on the first anniversary of the handcuffing incident, had expanded significantly in its second year. What had begun as support for 5 students had grown to 15, with funding now covering full tuition and mentorship opportunities at participating airlines. The Sky Global quarterly results exceeded projections again, Marcus continued, shifting to business matters. Dignity Guard implementation costs were offset by reduced complaint resolution expenses and improved customer retention. The business case keeps getting stronger. That's the most effective way to ensure continued adoption, Olivia observed. When equity becomes associated with operational excellence, rather than just compliance or public relations, it becomes institutionally sustainable. Her insight reflected a maturing perspective on systematic change, recognition that enduring transformation required alignment with core business incentives rather than merely moral appeals. It was a sophisticated understanding that belied her 20 years. Across town, Madison Parker prepared for her guest lecture at Boston University's Aviation Management program. Her journey from disgraced flight attendant to respected equity advocate had become an integral part of the Dignity Guard narrative, evidence that individual transformation could parallel institutional change. The most difficult part was confronting the patterns in my own behavior, she explained to the assembled students. Reviewing the video of how I treated Olivia Reynolds forced me to recognize biases I had denied for years. That recognition was painful but necessary for growth. Her candor about her failures and subsequent journey gave the presentation unique credibility. These weren't abstract principles, but lived experiences with real consequences, both the harm she had caused and the redemptive work she had undertaken since. I don't present myself as a success story, Madison clarified during the Q&A session. I represent an ongoing process of learning and improvement. The work of recognizing and addressing bias is never complete. It's a lifelong commitment to growth and accountability. Ramon Diaz shared similar perspectives in his role developing security training protocols. The officer who had once applied handcuffs so tightly they cut into Olivia's skin now led workshops on dignified security practices across multiple agencies. Security and dignity aren't opposing values, he emphasized to a class of airport security officers. When we replace demographic profiling with behavior-based assessment, we actually improve threat detection while reducing passenger complaints. It's not just more equitable, it's more effective. Their parallel journeys, Madison in customer service and Ramon in security, demonstrated how individual growth could contribute to systematic improvement. Neither sought personal redemption as the primary goal, but both had found meaning through commitment to preventing similar harm to others. At the Reynolds household, Marcus was reviewing applications for the expanded Elaine Reynolds Scholarship when Olivia arrived for their weekly dinner. These family meals had remained a priority despite their busy schedules, a time to connect personally beyond their professional collaboration. "How was your thermodynamics exam?" Marcus inquired as they prepared the meal together. "Challenging but fair," Olivia replied. "Professor Hernandez designs exams that test conceptual understanding rather than just computational skills." Their conversation flowed easily between academic matters, foundation business, and personal reflections. The healthy balance Olivia had established between her various pursuits reflected significant emotional growth since the traumatic incident that had initially threatened to define her. "I've been thinking about Mom a lot recently," she admitted as they sat down to eat. "Wondering what she would think about everything that's happened." "She would be amazed by your resilience," Marcus said with certainty, "and probably a bit amused that the aviation industry is finally addressing issues she faced decades ago." Olivia smiled at the thought. "She was always ahead of her time, like Doctor Austin, like Mother," Marcus observed, "though she would have insisted, as I do, that you maintain space for joy amid all the purposeful work." That balance had indeed become a priority for Olivia over the past year. Beyond her academic excellence and Dignity Guard leadership, she had developed meaningful friendships, joined the university choir, and even begun dating occasionally. Normal college experiences that had initially seemed secondary to her mission. The following day, at the scholarship announcement ceremony, Olivia stood beside her father as they welcomed 15 exceptional students committed to advancing equity in transportation. The recipients represented diverse backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives, united by their academic promise and dedication to creating more inclusive systems. "My mother faced many barriers as one of the first Black female commercial pilots," Olivia noted in her remarks. "This scholarship honors her legacy by supporting the next generation of innovators committed to removing those barriers permanently, not just for individual exceptions, but for everyone." The ceremony received significant media coverage, with most outlets noting the powerful evolution the teenager once handcuffed until she bled was now creating opportunities for others who might face similar obstacles. Personal trauma had been transformed into systemic improvement, individual injury into collective advancement. Later that week, Thomas Bradford visited MIT to discuss the next phase of Dignity Guard implementation with Olivia and Professor Sinclair. The Sky Global CEO, who had once faced possible termination amid the handcuffing scandal, had become an industry leader in passenger experience innovation. "International implementation is accelerating faster than projected," he reported. "Airlines that initially resisted are now requesting expedited adoption as they see the competitive advantages early adopters have gained. The adaptation protocols for different cultural contexts are crucial," Olivia emphasized. "The underlying principles of dignity remain constant, but how they manifest in passenger interactions varies significantly across regions." The meeting reflected how their professional relationship had evolved, from crisis response to collaborative innovation. Bradford now treated Olivia not as a victim requiring redress, but as a valued partner in ongoing transformation. As implementation expanded, individual stories of impact continued emerging, passengers whose experiences had fundamentally changed under the new systems, employees whose work had become more fulfilling when freed from biased protocols, security officers whose effectiveness had improved with more equitable approaches. A Black executive wrote to Sky Global, "For 20 years, I've prepared myself mentally for the inevitable extra scrutiny, the subtle questioning of my first-class status, the random security checks. Flying your airline recently was the first time I experienced none of that. Just professional service without the exhausting burden of justifying my presence." A Muslim family shared, "Our children noticed immediately. They're treating us like everyone else," our daughter whispered, surprised. That simple statement reveals both how rare equal treatment has been and how meaningful it is when finally experienced. These testimonials reflected the human impact of systematic change, not abstract metrics, but fundamental shifts in lived experience. For Olivia, they provided powerful validation that the work sparked by her own traumatic experience was creating meaningful improvement for countless others. The personal triumphs extended beyond professional accomplishments to psychological healing. The nightmares that had plagued Olivia after the incident had largely subsided. The instinctive tension she had felt in airports had diminished significantly. The habit of touching her wrist scars when stressed had become less frequent. Dr. Bennett, her therapist, noted these positive developments during their now monthly sessions. "You've integrated the experience into your life narrative without being defined by it," she observed. "That's remarkable progress in trauma recovery." Olivia nodded thoughtfully. "I still think about it, of course. The scars are still visible. But it feels like one chapter in my story now, not the entire book." That perspective, seeing the incident as formative but not defining, represented perhaps her most significant personal triumph. The bleeding teenager in handcuffs had evolved into a multifaceted young woman pursuing excellence across various domains. Her trauma transformed into purpose, but not permitted to constrain her potential. As Olivia continued developing both as an aerospace engineer and equity advocate, she embodied the possibility of turning pain into progress without being limited by past injuries. The systems she was helping create would protect dignity for millions of travelers, while her own journey demonstrated the remarkable resilience of the human spirit when supported by both personal determination and systematic reform. Full circle moment. Newark International Airport bustled with morning activity as Olivia Reynolds approached the Sky Global check-in counter. Exactly 2 years had passed since she had been led bleeding through this same terminal, handcuffs cutting into her wrists, public humiliation captured on dozens of phones. Today she returned not as a passenger, but as a featured speaker at the aviation industry's annual Customer Experience Summit. The symmetry was not lost on her, addressing industry leaders in the very location where discriminatory treatment had once left her physically injured and emotionally traumatized. "Good morning, Ms. Reynolds," greeted the check-in agent warmly. "Your keynote is the most anticipated session of the conference. We're honored to have you here." Olivia smiled, noting the Dignity Guard emblem discreetly displayed on the agent's uniform, evidence of the system now operating throughout the airport. "Thank you. It's a meaningful opportunity to come full circle." As she moved through the terminal toward the conference center, Olivia noticed the physical changes implemented since her ordeal. The security office where she had been detained was now a passenger advocacy center, staffed by trained professionals focused on resolving conflicts equitably. Information displays clearly outlined passenger rights and complaint procedures in multiple languages. Security officers wore visible body cameras with indicator lights showing they were recording. Small changes individually, but collectively they created an entirely different atmosphere, one where dignity was protected by design rather than dependent on individual goodwill. The conference hall was filled to capacity when Olivia took the stage. Industry executives, government officials, technology specialists, and civil rights advocates had gathered to hear from the young woman whose traumatic experience had catalyzed industry-wide transformation. 2 years ago in this very airport, Olivia began, her voice steady and clear, I was handcuffed until I bled, publicly humiliated, and denied medical care, all because someone decided I didn't belong in first class. The room fell silent, the direct reference to her ordeal creating immediate engagement. I could stand here today and tell that story again in painful detail, she continued. But most of you are familiar with what happened. What matters more is what has happened since. The systematic transformation that has changed how millions of passengers experience air travel. She advanced to her first slide, showing implementation data across the industry. Dignity Guard is now operating at 87% of domestic airports and 64% of international hubs. Bias incidents have decreased by 78.3% across participating carriers. Customer satisfaction has improved by 32.7% among minority passengers, while operational efficiency has increased by 17.2% overall. The metrics were impressive, but Olivia emphasized the human impact behind the numbers. These aren't just statistics. They represent real people who can now travel without the burden of presumed suspicion, without the exhausting vigilance required when dignity depends on individual discretion rather than systematic protection. From the audience, Madison Parker watched with complex emotions. The flight attendant, who had initiated Olivia's removal and humiliation, was now directing Sky Global's equitable treatment training program, using her own failures as powerful teaching examples. Transformation isn't just about technology, Olivia continued, acknowledging Madison with a slight nod. It's about culture, about individual commitment to questioning assumptions and valuing dignity. The algorithm detects patterns, but humans create those patterns through countless daily interactions. The presentation shifted to upcoming developments, Dignity Guard 3.0 with enhanced adaptation capabilities for different cultural contexts, expanded applications beyond aviation to other transportation modes, and integration with emerging technologies like biometric screening and artificial intelligence. The core principle remains consistent, Olivia emphasized. Dignity isn't a luxury or a marketing feature. It's a fundamental right that transportation systems must protect systematically. As she concluded her keynote, Olivia shared a personal reflection that brought her journey full circle. The scars on my wrists have faded significantly over these 2 years, she noted, briefly displaying the now subtle silver lines visible against her dark skin. But they'll never disappear completely. They remain as reminders not just of injury endured, but of purpose discovered. The standing ovation that followed reflected both respect for her personal resilience and appreciation for the systematic improvements her work had catalyzed. As industry leaders lined up to speak with her afterward, Olivia noticed Madison waiting patiently at the edge of the group. When the crowd finally thinned, Madison approached with evident trepidation. "Your presentation was powerful," she offered, "especially coming from someone who would have every right to remain bitter about what happened." "Bitterness wouldn't create better systems," Olivia replied matter-of-factly, "and better systems were always the goal." Their relationship remained professionally collaborative rather than personally warm, authentic acknowledgement of the harm done without pretense of complete reconciliation. They had found a productive partnership in the work of transformation, even as the history between them maintained certain boundaries. "The training program has now reached every Sky Global employee," Madison reported, "and the peer airline adoption is accelerating as the business case becomes increasingly clear." "That's the tipping point," Olivia observed. "When equity becomes associated with operational excellence rather than just compliance or public relations." Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement that boarding had begun for Olivia's return flight to Boston. As she gathered her materials, Madison offered a final thought. 2 years ago in this airport, I made assumptions about you based on how you looked rather than who you are," she acknowledged. "The system I was part of enabled and encouraged those assumptions. What you've built since then doesn't erase what happened, but it ensures it happens far less frequently to others. That's a remarkable legacy." Olivia nodded, accepting the observation without either dismissing the harm or dwelling on it unnecessarily. Systems shape behavior. When we design better systems, we create better outcomes. As she made her way to her gate, Olivia noticed a young black girl, perhaps 12 years old, traveling with her mother. The child watched the boarding process with evident nervousness, clutching her mother's hand tightly. "First time flying?" Olivia asked kindly. The mother nodded. "She's a little anxious about the whole process." "It can be intimidating," Olivia acknowledged, "but things have improved significantly in recent years." The boarding agent called first-class passengers, and Olivia noticed the young girl's expression, a mixture of excitement and trepidation as she and her mother prepared to board with premium tickets. "Enjoy your flight," Olivia offered with a meaningful smile. "You belong exactly where your ticket says you do." The mother caught the deeper significance of this assurance, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Thank you," she replied with equal meaning. As Olivia boarded her own flight minutes later, she reflected on the symmetry of the moment, returning to Boston from Newark, just as she had attempted to do 2 years earlier for her MIT interview. The journey that had been violently interrupted then was now complete, though along an entirely different path than originally planned. The flight attendant greeted her professionally at the door, the interaction refreshingly unremarkable, no excessive scrutiny, no questioning of her first-class status, just the standard welcome extended to every passenger regardless of appearance. Settling into her seat, Olivia noticed the Dignity Guard emblem on the safety card in her seat pocket. What had begun as her response to personal trauma was now integrated into the standard operations of airlines worldwide, protecting dignity by default rather than by exception. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Olivia glanced out the window at Newark Airport receding below. The site of her worst public humiliation now transformed into the launch point for industry-wide change. The full circle moment wasn't about returning to where she had been, but about transforming that place into something better for all who would pass through it in the future. The scars on her wrist caught the sunlight streaming through the window. No longer wounds, but witnesses to both pain endured and purpose discovered. Both injury inflicted and healing achieved. Both personal trauma and systematic transformation. Beyond aviation. The conference room at the Department of Transportation headquarters in Washington, D.O.S., was filled with representatives from diverse transportation sectors, railways, public transit systems, ride-sharing platforms, cruise lines, and autonomous vehicle developers. All had gathered to discuss the adaptation of Dignity Guard principles to their specific operational contexts. At the podium, Olivia Reynolds presented the core framework that had transformed the aviation industry, now being modified for broader application. At 21, she spoke with the authority that comes from demonstrated results rather than mere position or age. The foundational insight of Dignity Guard is that dignity isn't just a matter of goodwill, but of systematic design, she explained, advancing through key slides. When we create systems that protect dignity by default, we improve both passenger experience and operational efficiency. The data displayed behind her told a compelling story, Sky Global's transformation from cautionary example to industry leader, with bias incidents down 78.3%, customer satisfaction up 32.7%, and operational costs reduced by 12.6%. These weren't just ethical improvements, but business advantages that had captured the attention of leaders across transportation sectors. Each mode of transportation presents unique operational challenges, Olivia continued, but the core principles remain consistent. Systematic monitoring for potential bias, early intervention before incidents escalate, and accountability metrics that drive continuous improvement. The Amtrak implementation was already showing promising results. 6 months into their adapted version of Dignity Guard, passenger complaints related to discriminatory treatment had decreased 68%, while operational efficiency had improved 14.3%. The Northeast Corridor was serving as the test case for eventual system-wide implementation. The conductor-passenger interaction differs significantly from flight attendant-passenger dynamics, explained Amtrak's customer experience director. But the potential bias points, ticketing verification, seating disputes, service recovery, remain remarkably similar. The framework adapts well with proper calibration. Urban transit systems face different challenges, operating in environments with higher volume, shorter interactions, and more diverse passenger demographics. The Chicago Transit Authority had pioneered an adaptation for urban systems, focusing on security interactions and fare enforcement as the highest risk areas for dignity violations. Our implementation costs were offset within the first quarter, reported CTA's operations director. Reduced complaint processing alone saved $870,000, while improved passenger satisfaction metrics contributed to a 43% ridership increase in previously underserved communities. Ride-sharing platforms were developing digital adaptations, incorporating bias detection into their matching algorithms and driver rating systems. Uber's representative outlined their approach. When we identified geographic and demographic patterns in driver cancellations, we implemented systematic interventions that reduced discrimination claims by 53% while improving driver-passenger match efficiency. Cruise lines reported similar improvements, though in their unique context of extended passenger-crew interactions in confined spaces. Royal Caribbean had adopted Dignity Guard principles for their Mediterranean fleet, with plans for global implementation following their successful test phase. The Department of Transportation's Deputy Secretary, Linda Morales, addressed the gathering after Olivia's presentation. What began as a response to a specific incident has evolved into a framework for systematic improvement across transportation modes. The federal guidelines we're developing are directly informed by these demonstrated successes. The Reynolds Transportation Equity Act was advancing through congressional committees with rare bipartisan support. The proposed legislation would establish comprehensive standards for equitable treatment across all federally regulated transportation systems, using Dignity Guard metrics as the foundation for compliance evaluation. For Marcus Reynolds, observing from the audience, the expansion beyond aviation validated his strategic vision. When his daughter had been publicly humiliated 2 years earlier, he had recognized the potential for systematic transformation rather than merely seeking individual accountability or financial compensation. The framework's adaptability is its greatest strength. Marcus noted during the panel discussion. Each transportation mode faces unique operational constraints, but the fundamental principle, protecting dignity through systematic design, translates across contexts. The Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, MBTA, had become the latest transit system to announce Dignity Guard implementation. Following successful programs in Chicago, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles, public transit presented particular challenges with its high volume and socioeconomic diversity, but the principles had proven adaptable with appropriate modifications. Transit equity goes beyond avoiding discriminatory treatment, explained MBTA's implementation director. It extends to service distribution, accessibility, and fare structures. Dignity Guard provides a framework for addressing these systematic issues with measurable outcomes rather than just aspirational statements. The corporate adoption was impressive, but the cultural transformation was perhaps more significant. Throughout the transportation industry, equity was increasingly framed not as compliance burden, but as operational excellence. Not just doing good, but doing better in measurable ways. Academically, the expansion had attracted significant research interest. The Transportation Equity Lab at MIT had grown into a multidisciplinary initiative with substantial funding and industry partnerships. Olivia continued her involvement while pursuing her aerospace engineering degree, maintaining the unique integration of technical innovation and social impact that had characterized her work from the beginning. The cross-modal applications have revealed fascinating patterns, Professor Sinclair noted during her presentation. Each transportation mode has distinctive operational characteristics, but the underlying dynamics of bias emerge in remarkably similar ways. This suggests fundamental human patterns that can be systematically addressed across contexts. Harvard Business School had developed a case study on Sky Global's transformation, analyzing how crisis response had evolved into competitive advantage through ethical innovation. Wharton was examining the financial implications of equity initiatives across transportation sectors. Stanford's Design School was studying the human-centered aspects of dignity, protection, and service interactions. Madison Parker had expanded her role beyond Sky Global to industry-wide training development. Her journey from perpetrator to advocate remained a powerful narrative within the broader transformation story. Evidence that both individuals and institutions could change when properly motivated and supported. The most effective training combines technological understanding with personal accountability. Madison explained during her session, Dignity Guard can detect potential bias patterns, but preventing them requires human commitment to questioning assumptions and valuing dignity. Ramon Diaz shared similar insights from security perspectives, now directing implementation across multiple agencies. When we shifted from demographic profiling to behavior-based assessment, we didn't just reduce complaints, we improved actual security outcomes. Bias wasn't just unethical, it was inefficient. The impact extended beyond passenger experience to employee engagement. Transportation workers across modes reported higher job satisfaction when operating under the new protocols, finding their interactions less conflictual and more rewarding across all passenger demographics. I used to dread certain interactions, admitted a veteran bus operator during a focus group, not because of explicit prejudice, but because of unconscious patterns that created tension. The newest protocols have thus transformed those exchanges completely. Media coverage had evolved from scandal reporting to innovation profiles. Major publications featured stories of transportation equity as business advantage rather than merely ethical obligation. Financial analyses highlighted improved operational metrics and customer loyalty across implementing systems. Industry awards now included categories specifically recognizing excellence in equitable service delivery. Government interest continued growing beyond the Department of Transportation. The Justice Department's Civil Rights Division was studying the framework as a potential model for consent decrees in other service sectors. Housing and Urban Development was exploring adaptations for fair housing enforcement. The General Services Administration was considering similar approaches for government service delivery for Olivia Reynolds. Observing this expanding impact provided powerful validation that the work sparked by her own traumatic experience was creating meaningful improvement for countless others. The bleeding teenager in handcuffs had catalyzed not just a corporate crisis, but an evolving movement for service equity that continued expanding its reach and influence. As she often emphasized in her presentations, dignity isn't just the absence of humiliation, it's the presence of respect. And respect isn't just an attitude, it's a practice that can be systematically supported through thoughtful design of both technology and human systems. That insight, that dignity could be protected through intentional design rather than merely individual goodwill, was perhaps the most profound legacy of all. The transportation equity movement that had begun with Olivia's bleeding wrists was becoming a model for how institutions could transform in response to demonstrated failures, not through defensive reactions, but through genuine commitment to improvement. The commercial aircraft cruised smoothly at 35,000 feet. Passengers settled into the routine of a transcontinental flight. In Seat 3A, Olivia Reynolds reviewed presentation notes for her keynote at the International Transportation Conference, occasionally glancing out the window at the geometric patchwork of America passing below. At 22, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had transformed personal trauma into systematic improvement. Her MIT degree in aerospace engineering complemented her continued leadership of the Dignity Guard Foundation, creating a unique integration of technical expertise and social impact. The flight attendant approached with a beverage service. "Dr. Reynolds, would you care for anything to drink?" "Water would be fine, thank you," Olivia replied, noting the Dignity Guard emblem discreetly displayed on the attendant's uniform, evidence of the system now operating throughout the flight. As the attendant moved to the next passenger, Olivia observed the interaction with professional interest. The service was efficient and respectful, treating each passenger with consistent dignity regardless of appearance, small changes individually, but collectively they created an entirely different experience than what had been common just 5 years earlier. Across the aisle, a Black family with 2 young children received the same courteous service without the extra scrutiny or subtle questioning that had once been routine for minorities in premium cabins. The normalization of equitable treatment, making dignity the default condition rather than the exception, represented perhaps the most significant achievement of all the work that had followed from that painful day in Newark Airport. 5 years after being handcuffed until she bled, Olivia could reflect on both the personal and systematic transformation that had emerged from that traumatic experience. The Dignity Guard approach had expanded far beyond Sky Global Airlines to become an industry standard, with implementation across multiple transportation modes and growing applications in other service sectors. The metrics told a compelling story of transformation. Bias incidents down 87.4% across implementing transportation providers. Customer satisfaction improved by 42.8% among minority passengers. Operational efficiency increased by 23.6% overall. Employee retention up, or 18.9%, reducing training costs and improving service consistency. Complaint resolution costs reduced by 53.7%. Beyond these quantitative measures, the qualitative impact was equally profound. Travelers from minority groups reported fundamental shifts in their experience. Moving through transportation systems without the burden of presumed suspicion, without the exhausting vigilance required when dignity depends on individual discretion rather than systematic protection. A Black executive had written, "For 30 years of business travel, I developed coping mechanisms for the inevitable extra scrutiny, the subtle questioning of my first-class status, the random security checks. Now I can focus on my work rather than managing others' perceptions. The mental energy saved is incalculable." A Muslim family shared, "Our children noticed the difference immediately. They're treating us just like everyone else," our daughter observed with surprise. That simple statement reveals both how rare equal treatment has been and how meaningful it is when finally experienced. The systematic transformation had extended far beyond the original context. 87% of domestic airlines had implemented Dignity Guard systems. 64% of international carriers had adopted similar approaches. Amtrak had completed network-wide implementation across all routes. 43 major urban transit systems had adapted the principles for their operations. 7 cruise lines had integrated the approach into their service models. Ride-sharing platforms had developed digital versions for their unique context. Legislative frameworks had evolved alongside industry practices. The Transportation Equity Act had established federal standards based on Dignity Guard principles, requiring measurable outcomes while allowing flexibility in implementation approaches. Rather than imposing specific technologies, the framework focused on outcome metrics, requiring transportation providers to demonstrate dignity protection through measurable results. International adoption continued accelerating. The European Union had established similar standards across member states. The Asia-Pacific Aviation Association had developed regional benchmarks that adapted to specific cultural contexts. The International Air Transport Association had integrated dignity metrics into global safety and service standards. Academically, the Transportation Equity Lab at MIT had become a leading research center, developing new applications and analyzing implementation data from diverse contexts. Harvard Business School taught the Sky Global transformation as a core case study in ethical innovation and crisis management. Stanford's design school had incorporated Dignity Guard principles into their human-centered service design curriculum. Corporate adoption extended beyond transportation to other service sectors. Hotel chains, healthcare systems, and retail organizations were adapting the principles for their specific operational contexts. The systematic approach to dignity protection was proving relevant anywhere human interactions occurred within institutional frameworks. Individual transformations had paralleled systematic changes. Madison Parker, once the flight attendant who initiated Olivia's removal and humiliation, had become a respected leader in bias training and organizational transformation. Ramon Diaz, the security officer who had applied the too tight handcuffs, now directed implementation of revised security protocols across multiple agencies. Their journeys, from perpetrators of discrimination to advocates for reform, represented powerful narratives within the broader transformation story. Systems could change because people could change, when properly motivated and supported through both accountability and opportunity. The cultural transformation was perhaps most significant. Throughout service industries, equity was increasingly framed not as compliance burden, but as operational excellence, not just doing good, but doing better in measurable ways. What had once been relegated to corporate social responsibility statements was now featured prominently in strategic plans, operational frameworks, and investor presentations. For Marcus Reynolds, the comprehensive transformation validated his strategic vision. When his daughter had been publicly humiliated 5 years earlier, he had recognized the potential for systematic change rather than merely seeking individual accountability or financial compensation. The acquisition that almost didn't happen has become our most transformative investment, he often noted. Not just financially, though the returns have been exceptional, but in terms of meaningful impact. Personal healing had accompanied systematic transformation. The nightmares that had once plagued Olivia had long since subsided. The instinctive tension she had felt in airports had diminished almost entirely. The habit of touching her wrist scars when stressed had become increasingly rare. The scars themselves had faded to faint silver lines, barely visible unless specifically pointed out. Like her psychological healing, they would never disappear completely, but had become integrated into her life story rather than defining it, markers of both injury endured and purpose discovered. As Olivia prepared for her keynote address at the international conference, she reflected on the remarkable journey from bleeding teenager in handcuffs to recognized leader in transportation innovation. The transformation hadn't erased what happened. Nothing could do that, but it had created meaning and purpose from painful experience. The systems she had helped create protected dignity for millions of travelers, while her own journey demonstrated the remarkable potential for turning personal trauma into systematic improvement. What had begun in pain had evolved into protection. What had started as humiliation had developed into innovation. What had emerged from injury had expanded into transformation. And perhaps that was the most significant impact of all, not just the metrics or the technologies or the policies, but the profound demonstration that systems could be redesigned to protect human dignity by default rather than by exception. The bleeding wrist that had gone viral had catalyzed not just a corporate crisis, but an evolving movement for service equity that continued expanding its reach and influence 5 years later. As the aircraft began its descent, Olivia closed her presentation notes and gazed out the window at the approaching cityscape. The journey that had begun with handcuffs cutting into her skin had led to systems where dignity was protected as a fundamental right, rather than a conditional privilege. The final impact couldn't be measured solely in statistics or implementations, but in the lived experience of millions who could now move through the world with the dignity that should have been theirs all along. Future horizons. The MIT Transportation Equity Lab buzzed with activity as researchers worked on various projects extending Dignity Guard principles into new applications. 5 years after its founding, the lab had grown into a multidisciplinary research center with substantial funding and global partnerships. Olivia Reynolds, now completing her master's degree in aerospace engineering with a focus on ethical systems design, moved between workstations reviewing progress on several initiatives. Her leadership style was collaborative rather than hierarchical, drawing insights from diverse perspectives while maintaining clear focus on practical outcomes. The healthcare adaptation is showing promising preliminary results, reported Dr. James Wilson, leading the team adapting Dignity Guard principles for medical contexts. 6 months into the pilot program at Massachusetts General, bias incidents are down 63%, while patient satisfaction has improved across all demographic groups. What about the false positive rate? Olivia inquired, examining the data visualization. Currently at 83%, Wilson replied. Higher than our transportation implementations, but improving as the system learns from implementation feedback. The expansion beyond transportation had been a natural evolution, applying the core principles to other service contexts where systematic bias could affect human dignity. Healthcare had emerged as a particularly promising application, given well-documented disparities in treatment across demographic groups. The hospital environment presents unique challenges, Wilson explained. Higher stress, more complex interactions, life or death consequences, but the fundamental patterns of potential bias remain remarkably consistent with what we've observed in transportation. The adaptation maintained the core framework while customizing implementation for medical contexts. Pattern detection focused on triage decisions, pain management protocols, and diagnostic pathways. Intervention systems alerted supervisors to potential disparities in real-time accountability metrics, tracked outcomes across demographic groups. Early results from pilot hospitals showed significant improvements in both equitable treatment and operational efficiency. Patient satisfaction scores had increased, particularly among minority groups. Complaint resolution costs had decreased. Staff reported more positive interactions across demographic boundaries. Across the lab, another team was developing adaptations for educational environments. Professor Amanda Sinclair, who had supported Olivia's work from the beginning, led this initiative with particular focus on disciplinary systems and academic opportunity allocation. The school implementation presents different ethical considerations, Sinclair noted during their weekly review. Students are still developing, power dynamics are more pronounced, and the potential long-term impact of bias is particularly significant. The educational adaptation addressed these challenges through age-appropriate intervention protocols for different developmental stages, enhanced privacy protections for minors, specialized training for educators on developmental aspects of bias recognition. 7 school districts were participating in the pilot program, with preliminary data showing promising reductions in disciplinary disparities and improvements in educational opportunity allocation. Marcus Reynolds, now focusing primarily on the Dignity Guard Foundation, while delegating day-to-day operations of Reynolds Holdings to his executive team, reviewed expansion plans with the board of directors. The retail sector implementations are exceeding projections, he reported. Macy's and Target have completed initial rollout with a 57% reduction in reported bias incidents and a 23% improvement in customer satisfaction metrics among minority shoppers. The retail adaptation had required significant customization for high-volume, brief customer interactions, but the core principles had translated effectively with appropriate modifications. Major chains were implementing the approach not just as ethical obligation, but as competitive advantage in increasingly diverse consumer markets. Government service applications represent our most significant growth opportunity. Marcus continued. The General Services Administration pilot programs have shown compelling results in both citizen experience and operational efficiency. The expansion into government services addressed well-documented disparities in how citizens from different demographic groups experienced interactions with public agencies, from DMV offices to social service agencies. The systematic approach to dignity protection was creating measurable improvements in both citizen satisfaction and operational metrics. Technological evolution continued alongside application expansion. Dignity Guard 5.0 incorporated significant advancements in both analytical capabilities and implementation flexibility, enhanced pattern recognition through more sophisticated machine learning, improved adaptation protocols for diverse operational contexts, integration with emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and biometric screening. The technological innovations remain firmly grounded in human-centered principles, ensuring that automation enhanced rather than replaced human judgment in dignity. Protection. The AI integration presents both opportunities and challenges. Olivia explained to visiting implementation partners. Algorithmic systems can process more data points than human observers, potentially identifying subtle patterns of bias that might otherwise go undetected. But they also risk perpetuating historical biases if not carefully designed and monitored. The lab's approach to AI integration emphasized rigorous testing for algorithmic bias before implementation, human oversight of machine learning processes, regular auditing of outcomes across demographic groups. International expansion continued accelerating, with adaptations respecting cultural diversity while maintaining core principles. The European Union had established comprehensive standards based on the Dignity Guard framework. Asian implementations had modified specific protocols while preserving fundamental dignity protection goals. African nations were developing adaptations for their particular transportation and service contexts. The cultural adaptation is perhaps our most significant achievement, Marcus observed during a Foundation Board meeting, demonstrating that dignity protection can be systematized across diverse cultural contexts while respecting specific regional values. Individual transformations continued paralleling systematic changes. Madison Parker had advanced to executive leadership in organizational transformation, guiding companies through comprehensive cultural change beyond mere compliance. Ramon Diaz directed security reform initiatives across multiple agencies, transforming approach from punitive to protective without compromising effectiveness. Their journeys, from perpetrators of discrimination to leaders in reform, remain powerful narratives within the broader transformation story. Both had found meaning not through seeking personal redemption, but through commitment to preventing similar harm to others. The academic study of Dignity Guard principles had expanded into multiple disciplines. MIT's program remained the leader, but universities worldwide had established research initiatives examining applications across diverse contexts. Harvard Business School taught the Sky Global Transformation as a case study in ethical innovation. Stanford's Design School incorporated the principles into human-centered service curriculum. For Olivia Reynolds, observing this expanding impact provided powerful validation that the work sparked by her own traumatic experience was creating meaningful improvement far beyond its original context. The bleeding teenager in handcuffs had catalyzed not just a corporate crisis, but an evolving movement for service equity that continued expanding its reach and influence. The future horizons extended beyond current implementations to emerging applications and evolving technologies. Autonomous vehicle systems incorporating bias detection and machine learning algorithms, virtual service environments adapting dignity, protection to digital interactions, international standards development for global implementation guidelines. As Olivia explained to a graduate seminar, the fundamental insight to him that dignity can be protected through intentional system design applies anywhere humans interact within institutional frameworks. The specific implementation varies by context, but the core principles remain remarkably consistent. The scars on her wrists had faded to barely visible lines, physical reminders of both trauma endured and purpose discovered. The systems she had helped create protected dignity for millions across diverse contexts, while her own journey demonstrated the remarkable potential for transforming personal injury into systematic improvement that benefited countless others. As Dignity Guard continued evolving and expanding, its future impact would depend on maintaining this delicate balance between technological innovation and human values, between systematic design and individual commitment, between universal principles and contextual adaptation. The horizon wasn't a destination, but an expanding frontier of possibility for creating systems where dignity was protected by design for everyone. Powerful conclusion. The commercial aircraft cruised smoothly at 35,000 feet. Passengers settled into the routine of a transcontinental flight. In seat 3A, Olivia Reynolds reviewed presentation notes for her keynote at the International Aviation Conference, occasionally glancing out the window at the geometric patchwork of America passing below. At 26, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had transformed personal trauma into systematic improvement. Her MIT doctorate in aerospace engineering complemented her continued leadership of the Dignity Guard Foundation, creating a unique integration of technical expertise and social impact. The flight attendant approached with a beverage service. "Dr. Reynolds, would you care for anything to drink?" "Water would be fine, thank you." Olivia replied, noting the Dignity Guard emblem discreetly displayed on the attendant's uniform, evidence of the system now operating throughout the flight. As the attendant moved to the next passenger, Olivia observed the routine interaction with professional interest. The service was efficient and respectful, treating each passenger with consistent dignity regardless of appearance. Small changes individually, but collectively they created an entirely different experience than what had been common just 6 years earlier. Across the aisle, a black family with 2 young children received the same courteous service without the extra scrutiny or subtle questioning that had once been routine for minorities in premium cabins. The normalization of equitable treatment, making dignity the default condition rather than the exception, represented perhaps the most significant achievement of all the work that had followed from that painful day in Newark Airport. Olivia's phone chimed with a message from her father. Congressional committee approved expanded transportation equity funding, implementation support secured for 50 additional transit systems this year. She smiled slightly, appreciating both the practical impact and the symbolic significance. The movement that had begun with her bleeding wrists had evolved into a comprehensive framework for protecting dignity across transportation modes, supported by both public policy and private implementation. As she put away her phone, Olivia noticed a young black girl, perhaps 8 years old, watching her curiously from the row ahead. The child's mother noticed the attention and smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry, she explained quietly. "Zara recognized you from her school presentation about transportation leaders. She did her project on you." Olivia smiled warmly at the girl. "That's quite an honor. I hope your project went well." The child nodded enthusiastically. "I got an A. I told everyone how you made the airports and planes fair for everybody." "That's a perfect summary," Olivia acknowledged with genuine appreciation for the child's simple clarity. "Making transportation fair for everybody is exactly what we're trying to accomplish," the mother added softly. "Your work has made such a difference. My husband and I used to prepare our children extensively before flying, explaining why they might be treated differently, how to respond when it happened. Now we just talk about the excitement of travel. That change means everything." This personal testimonial, spontaneously offered rather than formally collected, carried profound meaning. The systems Olivia had helped create weren't just preventing negative experiences, but enabling positive ones, allowing this family to experience travel with joy rather than apprehension, with anticipation rather than defense. As the conversation concluded and Olivia returned to her presentation notes, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The traumatic incident that might have narrowed her life to a single mission had instead become integrated into a multifaceted identity. Engineer, innovator, advocate, leader, daughter. The bleeding teenager in handcuffs had evolved into a visionary leader, creating systems where dignity was protected by design, where belonging was guaranteed by right rather than granted by privilege, and where every passenger could move through the world with the respect that should have been theirs all along. The scars on her wrists had faded to barely visible lines, physical reminders of both trauma endured and purpose discovered. Like her own healing, the systems she had helped create weren't perfect, but represented meaningful progress, measurable improvement in how millions experience movement through the world. As the aircraft began its descent toward Los Angeles, Olivia closed her presentation notes and gazed out the window at the approaching cityscape. The transportation equity movement that had begun with her personal injury continued expanding its reach and influence, creating systematic protection for human dignity across diverse contexts. The core insight remained as relevant as ever: dignity could be protected through intentional design rather than merely individual goodwill. The technology enabled this protection, but human commitment sustained it. The metrics measured progress, but lived experience validated it. The policies created frameworks, but cultural transformation fulfilled their promise. When the aircraft touched down and passengers prepared to disembark, Olivia observed the routine interactions with quiet satisfaction. The flight attendants treated each passenger with consistent respect. The gate agents processed everyone efficiently without differential scrutiny. The security officers maintained vigilance without defaulting to demographic profiling. These weren't dramatic changes individually, but collectively they created an environment where dignity was the standard expectation rather than the uncertain exception. The transformation wasn't complete. No systematic change ever is. But the progress was undeniable, measurable in both statistical improvements and human experiences. As Olivia collected her belongings and prepared to exit, young Zara and her family gathered in the aisle nearby. The child looked up at Olivia with unrestrained admiration, a powerful reminder of why this work mattered beyond metrics and milestones. "Dr. Reynolds," the girl's father said quietly, extending his hand, "thank you for turning your painful experience into protection for our children. They'll grow up in transportation systems that treat them with the dignity they deserve because of the changes you helped create." Olivia shook his hand, deeply moved by the personal acknowledgement. "Systems change when enough people decide they should," she replied. "I just help provide the framework. It's implemented by countless individuals committed to equitable treatment every day." As she walked through the terminal toward her conference, Olivia reflected on the most profound lesson from her journey. Transformation wasn't about punishment or retribution, but about creating systems where dignity was protected by default rather than dependent on individual advocacy or circumstance. The handcuffs that had once cut into her wrists until she bled had catalyzed not just a personal mission, but a systematic movement for transportation equity. The pain that might have hardened into bitterness had instead fostered innovation and improvement. The trauma that could have defined her had become integrated into a larger purpose that benefited millions. Sometimes justice wasn't about vengeance, but transformation. Sometimes healing wasn't about forgetting, but creating meaning from memory. Sometimes the most powerful response to injury wasn't retaliation, but renovation, building systems where similar harm couldn't happen to others. The scars on Olivia Reynolds' wrists would never completely disappear, but neither would the systems she had helped create to protect dignity across transportation modes. Both would remain as testimonies to the remarkable potential for transforming personal trauma into systematic improvement, individual injury into collective advancement, painful experience into purposeful change. And perhaps that was the most powerful conclusion of all. Not that suffering could be erased, but that it could become the catalyst for creating something better, something that protected others from experiencing similar pain, something that transformed the world in meaningful ways that extended far beyond the original injury. As Olivia Reynolds prepared to address the international aviation leaders awaiting her keynote, she carried this wisdom not as an abstract principle, but as lived experience. Dignity wasn't just the absence of humiliation, but the presence of respect, systematically protected through thoughtful design of both technology and human systems. And that protection created better experiences, not just for those previously vulnerable to discrimination, but for everyone who moved through the world. If you've ever been treated unfairly because of how you look, this story is for you. It's a reminder that dignity isn't a privilege. It's a right that belongs to everyone. Our world changes when brave individuals stand up and refuse to accept injustice as normal. Thank you for witnessing this powerful story of transformation. If you believe in equal treatment for all, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire change and remind us of our shared humanity. Remember, sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't loud protest, but the quiet, determined work of creating lasting change. Together, we can build a world where everyone is treated with the respect they deserve.